r/Nosleep. Posted by u/MRuchia. Al Capone's vault wasn't empty. Sorry Geraldo, title says it all. Well, maybe not quite all. While it's true that those 5 short words aptly describe the conclusion I've come to, after reading the testimony of my now deceased friend, and consulting the old journal he left in my care, they do little to outline the strangeness of the past 24 hours, and they certainly fail to explain the bizarre chain of events which placed a 32-year-old secret in my hands. Full disclosure? I'm not sure I can explain it either. Right now, my world feels like it's been turned upside down, and every scrap of sense is being shaken from its pockets. If you want answers or understanding, then I'm afraid I just don't have them. But as a longtime lurker on this subreddit, I felt like I owe you guys the story. Okay, so before we get to yesterday's events, a quick recap of the past 3 decades. The year is 1986, a complex of dark tunnels and sealed rooms are uncovered beneath the streets of Chicago. Though the on-site team find little more than dust and concrete in the first few days, a struggling TV studio sees something different amidst the rubble, a deep vein of unadulterated TV gold. See, a number of these subterranean tunnel systems ran throughout Chicago, and it's no secret they were used as smuggling routes, speakeasies and headquarters for the city's most dangerous criminals during the Prohibition era. On top of that, the location of this particular tunnel system imbued the find with incredible significance, severing the brakes on the studio's hype train. The Lexington Hotel isn't around anymore. Even in 1986, it was a derelict shell of its former self. However, in its heyday, the building served as the primary residence of a Chicago legend, the notorious mobster Al Scarface Capone. At the height of his power, the hotel, the tunnels beneath it and, some would say, the city of Chicago itself, belonged to him. And so it was, upon the hollow foundations of a crumbling hotel, that a landmark TV show was constructed. The studio planned to fully excavate the newly uncovered tunnels, resolving to broadcast the effort lived throughout the nation. After more than half a century, they were going to open Al Capone's vaults, with every development revealed to the public as soon as it happened. When the long-awaited night came around, an astounding proportion of the American nation tuned in to watch a small excavation crew, their uniforms emblazoned with the studio's insignia, hammer, saw and dynamite their way into the depths of the complex. Representatives from the IRS stood by, eager to recover any ill-gotten cash found at the scene. A team of coroners followed suit, slightly less eager, but wholly prepared to identify any skeletons that fell from Capone's concrete closet. And at the center of it all, the host, Geraldo Rivera, marched emphatically through the hallowed halls of the Lexington, touring the abandoned upper floors, firing Tommy guns, analyzing the first few discoveries and, in every spare moment, waxing lyrical about the possibilities that lay within the vault. By the end of the night, they'd found absolutely nothing. The secret sections of the underground vault were bare. The few empty bottles found early in the broadcast, heralded by Geraldo Rivera as a sign of things to come, turned out to be the most significant discoveries of the night. A crestfallen Geraldo sincerely apologized to the American public and, once the cameras stopped rolling, walked to the nearest bar to mourn the death of his career. The mystery of Al Capone's vaults was not well received in the weeks to follow. The public felt strung along, their viewership secured on the promise of intrigue, only to be left, quite literally, with nothing. It was ridiculed widely at the time, continuing on as a subject of parody and, even today, existing as a shorthand for anything that fails to fulfill its potential. Speaking of things which fail to fulfill their potential. 1993, 7 years since the airing of the ill-fated broadcast, a child named MRuchia Polanka is born at her family home in Rockford, Illinois. My mother was Dominican, my father is Polish. Dad gets referred to in the present tense because he didn't run off with a community college professor when I was 3 years old. My dad gave me every spare moment of his time, spending the rest of his waking hours working his fingers to the bone to put food on our table. Nevertheless, despite his hard work, and the countless opportunities he afforded me, my adolescent brain decided things just weren't fucked up enough for my liking. For a host of reasons too petty and embarrassing to recount, I decided that school wasn't worth my time. Instead, I found a group of like-minded morons and set about rebelling against the system in the most effective ways possible, shoplifting from small businesses, throwing bricks at abandoned cars, drinking mixers of Coke and vodka behind our local bowling alley with guys twice our age. Things like that. Cut to 2009. My increasingly shitty behavior had finally reached a breaking point, and I found myself in front of a young offenders court, mumbling to a judge who was far smarter than the excuses she was hearing. An initial charge of grand theft auto was reduced to joyriding, as it was argued I had no intention of keeping the vehicle in question. The reduced sentence, as well as my first offender status, left me with a criminal record and 200 hours of community service. I would have taken 400 more to forego the sight of my father, sitting in a rented suit, crying quietly beside me as the sentence was passed. Looking back on it now, it's fair to say he was my Geraldo and, in that moment, I was his empty fucking vault. I got placed with a company called Patronage, because caring never gets old. It's a charity which runs pen pal schemes and visitation for the 30% of elderly people who are living alone across America. I was paired with a supervisor and, under his watchful eye, set out to visit the old and lonely residents of Rockford. That's how I met Ralph Helmer. A retired construction worker and lifelong chess enthusiast, Ralph used to play a game every day with his wife of 20 years, going so far as to call their relationship a chess game that somehow became a marriage. I encountered him 2 years after her passing, and within the first minute of meeting me, he pulled me away from my supervisor and marched me through to the lounge where a cheap board was waiting on the table for us, next to a photo of his wife in a polished silver frame. I'd never played before, and my adolescent asshole brain was reflexively dismissive of the idea. But something about Ralph's childish enthusiasm, and his unending patience as a teacher, made him impossible to turn down. Almost imperceptibly, the games became a regular fixture of my week. Eventually I cleaned up my act, made amends with my long-suffering father, got an apartment and accepted a full-time job at Patronage. I got promoted out of the visitation role a few years later, but that didn't really matter. By this point I'd been playing with Ralph far beyond the fulfillment of my community service hours. From a first glance, we would never seem a likely pair. However, over last 9 years, despite all odds and despite an age gap half a century wide, Ralph Helmer became the best friend I had in the world. On September 7, 2018, I attended his funeral. It was a small ceremony. Too small, frankly. Considering everything Ralph had meant to me, the influence he'd had on my life over the past 9 years, I'd hoped to find the chapel packed to the rafters, full of people who shared my respect for him, who felt the weight of his loss as I did. Instead there were 6 attendees, my old supervisor, 3 family members, my father and I, looking on as the man who helped to save my life was lowered into the ground beside his wife. Ralph's family, 2 adult stepchildren and a teenage granddaughter, spent half the time staring at me with a strange hostility and the rest of the time looking bored. As the priest began his final speech, the epilogue to Ralph Helmer's life, the granddaughter lowered her head, the light of a smartphone illuminating her black dress. It took everything I'd learned in my court-appointed anger management therapist to keep my mouth shut, and my eyes fixed ahead on my best friend's casket. Which brings us to this morning, the September 11, 2018, the day Ralph changed my life again. Every morning, I take a walk through my neighborhood, an exercise suggested by my aforementioned therapist which had grown into a habit over the following years. The hour-long route that begins and ends at my apartment doesn't usually take me past Ralph's former home, but ever since the funeral I've found myself gravitating in that direction. I like to look over the yard as I pass by, waiting for the plants to overgrow and the weeds to come in, so I can do the neighborly thing and cut them back. Honestly, I'm just looking for a reason to visit again. Today, as I passed by on the other side of the road, it became clear that the house already had visitors. On the curb outside Ralph's home, resting beside the quietly swinging gate, stood a gray Dodge Cherokee. I'd seen that make and model before, most recently parked outside the chapel on the day of the funeral. It was Ralph's stepson's car, and the open trunk was already halfway full with his father's possessions. I probably should have kept running. It was hardly any of my business, and it was entirely likely that Ralph's family had a claim to the contents of his house. But something about their demeanor at the funeral, and the fact that only the most valuable pieces of furniture had been removed from the house, caused me to stop at the side of the road, and observe what was going on. I suppose I stood there a little too long. What the fuck are you doing here? MRuchia, Ralph's stepson, a red-faced gym rat in a tank top, marched out of his house towards me. Crossing the threshold of the gate, he stormed across the road and met me at the curb. "Did you talk to Kiner?" "I don't know what you're talking about." My response was genuine, though the man in front of me clearly didn't think so. "Of course you're here." The stepdaughter came next, lumbering down the path with a set of chairs under each arm and an empty silver picture frame in her free hand. Every syllable of her comment dripped with venom. As she reached the car, I felt her look me up and down. Clearly unimpressed with what she saw, she began to load the chairs into the trunk. "Michael, this is the last of it. Get in the car." "What's going on? Who's kinder?" I asked, a swell of indignance rising in my throat. Maria responded to my question by chuckling sarcastically, loading the chairs into the car as she spoke. "You know. He told us about you. You're the car thief, right? Young, pretty, comes to hang out every week. I told my brother, I bet she loves to play chess." And lo and behold, the chairs clack together as she gestures theatrically. "Is that all you did for him?" "Excuse me?" Placing the final chair into the car, and striding over to the passenger seat, she looked back at me with a look of smug vindication across her face. "Honey, I don't care. I looked it up yesterday, we got a case for undue influence." She smirked, each syllable of that final term punctuated with the jab of a red shellac fingernail. "Maria." Her brother spoke her name as a warning, telling her to get into the car. "We're taking all this somewhere safe. If you want it, talk to our lawyer." Maria climbs into the passenger seat as her brother starts the car. "You wanted to step into a courtroom again, then be my guest." I stood on the curb and watched them leave. As they drove off, I heard an engine kick into life behind me. Looking around, I saw an old classic car, I think a Chevrolet Camaro? In deep burgundy. It cruised past Ralph's house and down the road, turning the corner in the same direction as Maria and Martin. I'd seen the car on my walk, but I'd thought it was empty. I certainly didn't notice anyone climb inside. I spent the rest of the day at my dad's house. He said he needed some help cleaning out the garage, which I'm pretty sure was a veiled attempt to keep an eye on me. I got home at 8 p.m., exhausted and criminally overfed. Walking down the corridor to my apartment, I became aware of the medium-sized object that was leaning against my door. As I drew closer, I discovered a hand-delivered package. Thin but perfectly square, neatly wrapped in brown paper and string, with no note included anywhere on the package or the floor around it. Picking it up and tilting it gently from left to right, I could feel something shifting inside a hard wooden container. I quickly looked down both ends of the corridor, checking for someone who might have delivered it. Seeing no one, I let myself into my apartment, cutting the string with a paring knife and slowly pulling the paper packaging aside. It was a chess set. Ralph had owned more than a few. In fact, I'd seen a bunch of the more expensive ones in the back of his stepson's car this morning. I'd never seen this one before, however. It was large, cheap, the sort of board you'd buy if you were just starting off in the hobby and not sure whether or not to commit. The first thing I noticed was on the grid itself. Written in what looked like correction fluid, was a set of letters, one in each box. 8 rows across and 8 columns down. I took a picture of the layout and have uploaded it for you here. If you can make any sense of it, then be my guest. Placing it on my desk, I searched for the seam to get into the hollow section inside. Inside the hollow cavity, lay a visibly aged notebook, crinkled yellow pages in a jacket of weathered green leather, 2 yellow sticky markers poking out the top. The note beside it was newer than both the journal and the board itself. I've typed the contents of this note up for you to read. I realize you might have trouble believing the claims made in the documents below, and, if that's the case, then welcome to the club. The final confession of Ralph Helmer. To whom it may concern. You hold in your hands the final confession of Ralph Oliver Helmer. If all has gone according to plan, this note, and the accompanying document, should have been delivered to a trusted confidant in the fulfillment of my last will and testament, and therefore, should only be available to you following my death. I have chosen this method of confession, primarily, out of cowardice. I have hidden from the consequences of my actions for a long time, and now I have elected for them outlive me. I also hope that, by leaving this confession to the end of my life, I will have placed sufficient time between the incident in question and its present discovery. An old man once told me that the secrets buried at an empire's height are more likely to be uncovered in its ruins. At first, I didn't know what he meant, but, in time, I've come to agree with him. Sometimes the truth must be buried in order to be revealed. It must be suppressed until the forces that would destroy it outright are weakened by time and fate. I can only hope the parties involved with these events are themselves in ruin, that they may no longer pose a threat to you, as they have to me for the entirety of my life. So, without further ado, my confession is as follows. In 1987 I was part of a televised excavation project beneath the Lexington Hotel in Chicago, Illinois. The program was produced by Westgate Studios, and titled The Mystery of Al Capone's Vaults. It is popularly believed, by the 30 million viewers of this show, and by all those involved in the production, that the excavation was a disappointment, yielding no significant discoveries. I can confirm that this is not the case. Following the destruction of a concrete wall, as the program was running Geraldo Rivera's interview with Buddy Rogers, I ventured into a previously untouched section of the tunnel system, accompanied by 2 of my fellow workers. While the production crew were briefly occupied elsewhere, we stumbled across a discovery of incredible significance. 3 highly detailed, handwritten journals, all of them at least 40 years old, were uncovered from behind a wooden panel. At the time, we had no idea what we had discovered. All we knew is that the artifacts themselves would be worth a fortune, and that they would be removed from our possession, forever, as soon as the production reached us. The decision was taken quickly, and undertaken unanimously. Moments before the film crew approached, I hid the documents at the bottom of my toolkit, where they remained until after the production wrapped. Once the show was over, me and my compatriots took the journals home with the intention of selling them once enough time had passed. This is my confession. Al Capone's vault was never empty. That is a convenient fiction used to conceal the robbery of its sole contents by myself and 2 accomplices. I did nothing to atone for these actions in life, but I believe I have served my punishment. In every sense of the word, no fortune came from our actions that day. Instead, the theft of those journals, and my reading the words contained within, has proven to be the single worst decision of my life. It has led me to an existence of fear, betrayal and total secrecy. The first of the 3 uncovered journals is included within this package. The truth contained within was buried in the 1940s and, in the 1990s, I buried this truth again. Perhaps it should remain so, perhaps it should be destroyed entirely. The privilege, and the burden, of this truth now rests with you. Ultimately, I believe these journals can be an unparalleled gift or a tragic and inescapable curse. In the end, that difference is simply a matter of wisdom. I hope you are wiser than me. Upon completion of my first reading, I stared at the note for a good few minutes. I knew that Ralph had worked in construction in the past, but he'd never mentioned a TV show, and he always seemed like the last person who'd do anything remotely criminal. I almost felt angry at the words on the page, for offering me a darker perspective of someone I greatly admired. Moving the note aside, I found myself staring at the old journal, almost afraid to look at what was inside. After a few moments of deliberation, placed it on my desk, and opened it to the first bookmarked page. I've put it below for you guys to read and, if there are any developments, I'll update tomorrow. Journal entry, 1920. There's a dead man sitting across from me, and I'm the only one who knows it. It's been the same way for the past 2 years. A good minute before the hammer falls on some poor sucker, I'm forced to watch it raise above their head, to see the last shreds of hope in their eyes as the downward swing begins. Some people round here would probably enjoy this feeling, knowing something the chump in front of you don't. But honestly, I never liked it. I just wanna warn them. There were 3 guys across from me, Bob, Jay, and Francis. Left to right there at 18, 12 and 11. I got a queen face up, coming to 20 after the peak. Not a bad position for the house. What did you see there, boy? Should I be worried? Bob laughs at his own wheeze, and sticks with 18. Even though he'll lose this round, it won't matter to him. The money on the table was more than most would make in a month, but it might as well be pocket change to Bob Marino. Jay busts himself with a jack and, always a bad loser, decides to take a long angry walk to the billiard table. I know he'll find his way back. A long angry walk is what brought him to my table in the first place. That just leaves Francis, wearing a familiar look of misplaced confidence as the last few bills of his rest on the table. I watch the hammer start to raise. It's not that I can see the future. Far as I know, nobody can. I always had a pretty firm grip on the past though. In this case, the last 2 face cards have already been played on the table. I've seen all the 10s, 8s, 7s, 5s and 3s leave the shoe over the last 40 minutes, resting face down on the other side of the table. Francis is an optimist. Sometimes that's commendable, but sometimes it leaves you waiting on a 10 that'll never come. I hit him with a 3 and a 9, staring down at the table as I collect his money and set up the next hand. I busy myself with the work as he stumbles off to a house with no lights. I know it ain't friendly of me, but I hate seeing the shadow that passes over his face. I've already seen it too many times and, once I've seen something, I have a real hard time forgetting. When I look up again, I see a face I'm happy to remember. Always thought you were something special. Lillian fixes me one of her sideways smiles, sidling over to me with an empty tray. She picks up the glasses from my table as I try and put some words together. Boss is asking for you. You steppin' up in the world? The boss has asked for me load of times over the years, but I still feel queasy at the idea. Who's got the table? Harry's comin' down. Why, you plannin' to keep him waitin'? I tell Bob Marino that someone'll be right down for the guy. I give Lillian my best and make my way to the second floor. It's a long walk to Torio's office, and like I said, it never gets any easier. I've been in there a handful of times now, helping out wherever I can, but every time I meet the guy feels like the first. I can hear conversation going on as I arrive at the door. I wish it wouldn't have to come to this, but it's the cost of enterprise. Torio says that just before I knock. There are 3 men in the office when I'm called inside. Torio's the one I know, sitting at his desk like normal. Across the table from him is some tall fella in a gray suit. I don't know how, but I can tell he's from out of town. The 3rd man I've seen around, and I know by reputation. There's no expression on his face as he looks me over, but I'm close enough to see the powdered outline of a scar across his cheek. I try not to look at it too long. "Shut the door, kid," Torio says. "You asked for me, sir?" "That's right. Kid, meet Mr. Souza." He gestures to the newcomer, who smiles. Torio continues. "And have you met our man from New York?" "No," I say, turning towards the man with the scar. "It's a pleasure to meet you, sir." "Likewise." "Al." Torio searches through his drawers as he talks to the guy. "Give me a number between 1 and 130. "What's this about, boss?" "What do you mean, what's it about? Just give me a number." 67. "Attaboy. I know where this is going." Torio pulls the book from his desk, flicks through it for a while until he finds the right page, and hands it to Al. "Kid?" "It was a Saturday night," I begin, kinda nervous, "and such a Sabbath as followed. Ex officio professors of Sabbath breaking are all whalemen. The Ivory Pequod was turned into what seemed a shamble, every sailor a butcher. You would have thought we were offering up 10,000 red oxen to the sea gods." "Okay, that's enough." Torio waves me into silence. "How'd he do, Al?" The out-of-towner looks impressed. Al seems amused. "Kid should be in the circus." Torio laughs. "He's read that book once, that's all he needs. Memory like a steel trap." "Sounds like a liability." Al stares at me as he says so. "Nah, the boy comes from loyal stock. You wouldn't know his father, but the man was adamant his kid help out. How is your pop, kid?" "He's good, sir, he sends his best." Torio smiles, before turning to the tall fella. "This boy knows the tunnels better than anyone I know. Better than our own men, certainly better than any Johns I'm aware of. It's like he's got the whole map in his head. That should prove be quite useful." Souza speaks for the first time. He sounds British, and he smiles at me as he talks. Kid, Torio continues. "Mr. Souza here is looking to use our tunnels for what was it again?" "Oh, there is very little to it," Souza says. "I am a scientist, and an investor in people. I simply wish for a place of conference with others in my organization. Somewhere away from common scrutiny." As I said, Mr. Souza's organization is looking to secure discreet use of the tunnel system. They've offered a handsome retainer and a compelling show of good faith. Torio grins. Usually he keeps a straight face about this stuff. It must be a whole lot of dough. He nods his head over to Al. "I'm leaving the responsibility of this deal with Mr. Capone here. You'll be working for him from here on out. Understand?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Finish up your shift and get a good night's sleep." Torio gets up and shows me to the door. I have a feeling tomorrow is going to be a new day for us all. I left the office, my heart pounding, and headed back upstairs. At the time I was worried about my new boss. Al's reputation had followed him from New York. He was a prodigy, a born leader and most likely the next head of the entire outfit, but he was also quick to temper, and those that angered him tended to meet their end quickly. Looking back, I was worried about the wrong person. I never found out what Mr. Souza offered as a show of good faith, but I think I can guess. That night, while Al and Torio were accounted for at the Four Deuces, someone lured Torio's boss, Jim Colosimo, out of his house and unloaded a barrel of lead into his chest. Colosimo was the only one standing in the way of Torio's bootlegging business, and the aftermath of his murder really was a new day for the Chicago outfit. The killer was never found. I suppose it could have been some nameless hood with a gun and bit of ambition. That's certainly what people believe. But none of them were in the back office that evening, and none of them were around for the business that would follow. None of them saw what was going on in the tunnels once Souza's people started to arrive. I remember, I left that meeting thinking I'd met the most dangerous man in Chicago, and I was probably right. But it wasn't Al Capone. Before I go into this, I should say, it is kinda your fault. I mean, not really, but everything stepped up a gear after I solved the strange code grid that Ralph left me, and I would never have figured it out so quickly if it hadn't been for some of the glorious nerds in this subreddit. Within about an hour of posting up the photo, I got a few orange envelopes with all kinds of suggestions. Burning through all my ideas in the first 5 minutes, I set my laptop up at the edge of my desk, grabbed a notebook and tried all your suggestions one by one. Eventually I got a message, from user Freshness28, suggesting it could be a Knight's Tour. As you've probably guessed, they were right. Ralph told me about the Knight's Tour a year or two ago. It's a chess puzzle. You take a standard board, as well as a single knight, and you proceed to move the piece around in its standard L-shaped motion. The twist? Your knight must visit all 64 squares on the board without landing on the same square twice. There are a lot of different solutions to the Knight's Tour, but only a handful of famous ones. After trying out a couple, in every available rotation, I finally stumbled across a route undertaken by the Turk, a robotic chess machine that Ralph always held in high esteem. Finding a map of the Turk's route online, using it as a reference, I set my knight down on e4 and made my way around the board, noting down every letter I landed on. After 10 minutes, and more than a few missteps, I had a 65-letter phrase scrawled across my notebook, one more letter than the squares on the board since the Turk's path is a closed loop. After splitting it out, it gave me 2 Chicago addresses. Beneath the warm feeling of accomplishment that followed the puzzle's solution, I couldn't help but hear a quiet voice in the back of my head. A sober and paranoid advisor telling me, in no uncertain terms, to stay away from those addresses. I knew where the voice was coming from, and I knew it had a good point. There was clearly something wrong with this story, a large part of the picture that I wasn't seeing. Ralph had said that the burden of his secret required a certain level of wisdom. Blindly chasing down these threads without any idea where they might lead? That didn't feel very wise at all. I left for Chicago the next morning. Ralph's confession must have been written some time ago, or perhaps things move quickly in the city. Either way, the first house listed in the puzzle was abandoned. An ugly pile of concrete and broken windows, barely standing in a fairly rough neighborhood on the edge of town. After circling the building, and quietly making my way through the dilapidated back door, it became pretty clear that no one was living here permanently. As I made my way back out of the house, passing through the kitchen in the direction of the exit, I could swear I heard something. The faintest sound of mechanical whirring, that stopped in its tracks as soon as I did. Looking around briefly, the source of the noise remained out of sight. I did, however, discover something I'd managed to ignore that had been with me since I stepped inside the house, a strange sense that I was being watched. The second address was in a marginally better side of town. Low-end suburban housing as far as the eye could see, with a rundown children's play area, rusting and unused, on the street corner. Cruising slowly down the street, I proceeded to scan the house numbers and my destination came into view. It wasn't difficult to spot, immediately standing out from the buildings on either side. The yard had been trimmed to a uniform length, the paint on the house looked almost fresh and a pristine white picket fence stood around the edge of the property. If there wasn't a homeowners association in this area, someone clearly hadn't gotten the memo. Parking up on the opposite side of the street, I made my way through the gate, approached the black front door and, after a quick internal pep talk, rang the bell. About 15 seconds later, the telltale drumming of feet on carpet thudded softly through the wood of the door, followed by the jangling of metal and the recognizable turning of a handle. The door swung back quickly before catching on a security chain. As soon as it opened, a towering, gruff-looking older man with a salt and pepper beard wedged his face into the gap, examining me with a reserved curiosity. "Can I help you?" I stood stock still for a second. As soon as he uttered the words, I realized I didn't have a reply. I'd let curiosity carry me this far, determined to get answers to the strange revelations that had come my way, but I'd given no thought to how I'd approach my inquiries. If Ralph's pleas for caution were to be taken seriously, I probably shouldn't mention the journals to every stranger I meet. In fact, until I knew what I was dealing with, I decided it would be better to stick to public record. "Hi, sorry to bother you. I'm friends with Ralph Helmer." The man's brow furrowed at the name. "Ralph Helmer?" After a moment, the frown became a light chuckle. "Wow, I ain't heard that name in a long time. How's the guy doing?" I drew a slow breath, giving myself space before my answer. I should have realized this was a possibility. I'm sorry, Ralph actually passed away quite recently." The man's expression froze as the news hit him. Eventually it fell into a weak smile that rang with false bravery. "I'm starting to hear that news a lot more nowadays. That's a damn shame though. How can I help?" "Well, this is silly, but I guess Ralph never talked much about his past when I knew him. Now he's gone, I'm just trying to find out more about the guy. I'm going through his address book and this place was in there. Do you have a moment to talk?" "Sure, happy to help. Can I get your name, miss?" This was going to be a gamble. I didn't want to give my full name to the guy, but he seemed like the cautious type who might ask for ID. A lot of the elderly people I visited with patronage did the same thing in the beginning. If I gave a false name that didn't match my documentation, there was no way he'd be willing to talk. In the end I decided to split the difference, and go by my first and middle name. "Ruchia. Michelle Ruchia." He nods politely. "Can I see some ID?" Slightly relieved that my gamble paid off, I produced my driver's license and held it in front of him. A pair of reading glasses appeared in front of his face as he squinted at the writing. "I go by my middle name. Family drama." Hearing my comment, the man let out an understanding chuckle, before promptly shutting the door. A few moments later, following the unfastening of the chain, the door swung fully open and the man gestured to his hallway. "Name's Roger. Come on in, I'll make us some coffee." The house was fairly Spartan, and incredibly neat. A sense of almost military precision imbued every cabinet and bookshelf. Roger left me in the lounge and quickly came back with drinks. As far as I could tell, he seemed pleasant enough, and was happy to answer my first probing questions about Ralph's life. The pair of them worked together, members of the same construction company who had dropped out of touch when the company went under. To him, Ralph had always been great to work with, but had mostly kept to himself. He wasn't even sure why Ralph would still have his address. Nodding and smiling, playing as nicely as I could, I slowly tried to gravitate the conversation towards their work together and, without mentioning it by name, towards their work with Westgate Studios. In the end, he brought it up himself. "We actually got to work on a TV show once," he said, with no discernible expression. "Oh really? What was that like?" "Yeah, the mystery of Al Capone's vaults," he laughed, thinking back on it. "I'm sure it was before your time. We dug through the tunnels below Chicago, sorta like a treasure hunt. Load of time pressure, load of work. Good pay though." "Wow. Did you find anything?" At this point, an almost imperceptible shadow passed across Roger's face. "You don't know?" he said, regaining his smile. "Whole thing was awash, place was empty." "Why? Ralph tell you anything different?" At the time, I thought it was just my imagination, but I remember the way he looked at me when that final question was asked. Behind the smile, there was something vaguely interrogatory, perhaps even threatening. "Honestly? He never told me about it." Roger paused, trapping us in the moment. After what seemed like an age, he shrugged. "Well, yeah. It was a big disappointment. You want another coffee?" He stands up and gestures for my cup. "Sure, thanks. Where's your bathroom?" "Next to the front door, on the right." Roger headed off to the kitchen, as I made my way back down the hall. This wasn't a ploy or anything. I'd needed to go since before I arrived, and certainly had no intention of snooping around the man's house. However, as I came out of the bathroom, standing in a small alcove just off the main hallway, I couldn't help but notice something beside me. There were two doors in this alcove. One leading to the small bathroom, and the other, a translucent screen door, presumably leading to the garage. Although it was impossible to glean any details through the pane of thick patterned glass, that didn't stop certain colors from bleeding through from the room beyond. The walls of the garage seemed to be a standard mix of plain and gray-white, but lower down, where a car presumably ought to be, the colors blended sharply into a block of deep red. Reaching my hand forward, I quietly turned the handle to the garage door, and gently swung it forwards. Before me stood a 1968 Chevrolet Camaro, painted in flawless and shimmering burgundy. It was the same car I'd seen outside Ralph's house, the same one that had passed me by as it followed a gray Dodge Cherokee, loaded with Ralph's possessions, down the road. There's no way it was a coincidence. But if that was the case, then that means Roger already knew where Ralph lived, which meant he probably knew that his former colleague had died, without my needing to reveal it. One way or another, he was lying to me. "You find the place all right?" The call came from down the hall, but every word was closer than the last. He was coming this way. I pulled the door closed and hurried around the corner to meet him in the hallway. Nope, found it just fine. I smiled at him, as innocently as I could. You happy to talk a little longer? After my discovery, I thought a speedy exit might be suspicious. I kept Roger talking for another 40 minutes, trying to keep the conversation as mundane as possible. After finishing my second coffee, I stood up and retrieved my bag. I'm sorry I have to get back. Thank you so much for everything. You're very welcome, I'll see you out. Roger smiles, gesturing once again into the hallway. As I stepped towards the doorway, reaching absent-mindedly for my car keys, I took notice of two small but disturbing details. Firstly, the keys took a while to find, lying deep down at the bottom of my bag, which was strange, considering they were the last thing I'd put in there. Secondly, just before we reached the doorway, glancing into the alcove for a final time, I was treated to a dismaying sight. The door to the garage was hanging slightly ajar. Apparently I didn't close it properly. Roger didn't seem to notice, but he would eventually, and by the time I'd seen my mistake I was already being ushered over the threshold of Roger's home. Thanks for your help. It was a pleasure to meet you. Likewise. Till we meet again. Roger grinned. The drive back to Rockford was an uneasy one, my mind bombarded with new questions. Why was Roger outside the house that day? What happened to the resident of Ambridge Avenue? Did Roger go through my bag and, if so, what was he looking for? For some of these questions, I simply had no answers. For others, the answers were simply too unnerving to contemplate. I got home in the late evening, cooked some instant ramen and set about transcribing the second bookmarked page in the journal. Although every page seemed to document the writer's life in the Chicago outfit, only the pages which Ralph had bookmarked seemed to concern the Englishman, Mr. Sousa. Brief mentions of him lie throughout the years, a sentence here, a paragraph there. It looks like Mr. Sousa was using the tunnels regularly, setting up a permanent meeting place in one of the larger underground chambers. The final bookmark in the journal was a few pages long, and took the rest of the night to type up. That is, until I was interrupted by a call from an unknown number. Turning away from my work, and checking my phone, I briefly considered hanging up the call. Very few people have access to my work phone, and everyone who does is already keyed into my address book. But something about the events of the day made me reconsider and, in a weird way, talking to anyone, even telemarketer, would have been a welcome break from the paranoid, isolating atmosphere which had followed me from Chicago. Hello? Is this Michelle Polanka? I didn't know the voice. It was high-pitched, fraught, forcing itself to be forceful. Yeah, this is her. You need to get out of your apartment right now. Who is this? It doesn't matter who I am. People are coming to your door right now, they're going to take you away and lock you up for the rest of your life if you don't move now. My blood runs cold. The voice continues. Turn off your lights, make it look like you never came home tonight. Grab what you can and get out of there. There was a dark sincerity in the voice, that made me stand up from my desk chair. Moving to my second-floor window, I stared out over the street. Though I couldn't make much out, I could see two shadowed figures moving with purpose across the path to my building. I ran to my bag, placed the journal inside as well as my laptop and charger. Reaching under my bed I pulled out a small green package, the stun gun my dad bought me when I moved into this neighborhood. I'd never had a use for it before but, until I could understand what was happening, I needed something to defend myself with. Turning off the lights, I made my way to the door. I could already hear footsteps in the stairwell. I had no idea who they were, or what was happening, but after the strange events that had occurred recently, I had no intention of finding out. The cool night air greeted me as I made my way onto my small balcony. I quietly closed the screen door as I heard my door buzzer ring. In my youth, hanging out places I wasn't supposed to be, I had found myself needing to make a few quick getaways. This wasn't the first time I'd had to jump from a second-floor window. Even so, it always looks higher than you think. The buzzer rings again, followed by a muffled voice and a sharp, hard knock. Gritting my teeth, I step over the side of my balcony and jump. The air rushes past me as I plummet to the ground. I roll as I make contact, a sharp pain shooting across my shoulder. As I pick myself up and begin to hurry away, I hear my front door being forced open, flashlight beams dancing through my window. Once I'm safely down the street, I duck into an alley and put my phone to my ear. Okay, you're going to tell me who you are, and who those guys were, right now. The voice doesn't hesitate. My name's Walter, you were at my house earlier, and they were the police. I just ran from the police? That's right. Why the fuck didn't you say something? I could get charged with a resisting arrest. Well, it's better than what they were gonna charge you with. The sincerity in his voice gives me pause. What do you mean? As far as I'm aware. The voice speaks pointedly. You're wanted for questioning concerning the deaths of Maria and Martin Towers. Ralph's stepchildren? When did? They were found slaughtered near their car about 3 hours ago, hidden off the road just outside of Rockford. Anonymous tip called it in and somehow, you're deep in the middle of it. Okay, I want you to tell me what the fuck is going on, right now. I will, soon. In the meantime, you need to ditch your phone and get yourself to Chicago. You got a pen? The man on the phone proceeded to give me an address, specifically, the address of the internet cafe I'm currently sitting in. I have no idea if the police are still looking for me, or what they have that links me to the deaths of the Towers family. But it's pretty clear that people are willing to do terrible things for this journal. Maybe that person is Roger, but there's a chance, however inconceivable, that whoever Mr. Sousa worked for all those years ago are still around today, and that they aren't happy with me posting up this story. If that's the case, then posting up the second of these logs would be a fairly unwise decision. Though, lately, those seem to be the only ones I can make. Journal entry, 1924. Al's angry, has been since the 29th. It's not for the reasons you'd think neither. Most fellas would crumble under the weight of his operation in Cicero. The place was a powder keg before the election, now there's a gun on every corner, blood spilled for every vote, bones broken for every inch of territory. But Al ain't scared of the fight. He's enjoying it. The boss is a general at war. A conqueror, with a vision for every street and storefront. Cicero ain't his problem, it's his escape. It's Mr. Sousa who's got his dander up. Ever since we struck that deal, the same day they cut down Colosimo, Al's watched Sousa leading people into his tunnels. We found a place for them, deep in the middle of it all, somewhere no one even knows about, and they're welcome to come and go as they please. It's crazy how much they're paying for the privilege. Enough for anyone to turn a blind eye to what they're doing down there. But Al don't like it. He don't like business that he doesn't understand going on in his territory, and though Torrio tells him to leave well enough alone, it don't suit the boss to sit on his hands like that. It all got too much on February 29th. A bunch of them came that day. A whole stream of people looking to get into the tunnels. As long as Sousa speaks for him I never had a problem, but Al didn't like the numbers that were headed in there, and he'd finally had enough. You know where they're going, don't you, boy? The boss sits in his favorite booth, staring straight ahead as all manner of person makes their way down the hatch. They got a meeting hall, they've been setting it up for a while. Al takes a moment, looking out the window. He doesn't even turn me when he speaks. I want to know what it's about, you understand? I nod. I know Torrio wouldn't be happy with this, but he's always telling me to do whatever the boss says. Anyway, Al ain't the only one who wants to know what's going on around here. The tunnels were hardly lit, but once I've been somewhere I can always find my way back. I moved as quiet as I could as I got toward the meeting hall, trying to listen to what was going on. Whatever they were gathered for, it was already in session. Some lady was talking, sounded like she was from East Asia or some such place, then another one, an American, started his own speech. We're still pushing the term conspiracy theorist, as a popular shorthand for these sorts of people. It's already gone a long way to discrediting them, but the fact remains, any information encoded into radio frequencies needs to be shored up. Are you volunteering or simply stating the requirement? Neither. I've already implemented the first round of improvements. Thank you, Nicola. Communication with the other chapters will be kept to a minimum until you tell us otherwise. Suddenly, I hear Mr. Sousa's voice. Next order of business. I realize we're a few years away, but we need to finalize our plans concerning the Ortigue project. The last time this was discussed, Mr. Lindbergh was being vetted for suitability. Can I ask how this has? That's the last thing I hear before the world turns black. Something thuds into the back of my head, knocking me to the ground. The tunnels come back into view for a second, except everything's starting to spin. My head hurts something awful as a gorilla of a man hauls me out of my hiding place. Doesn't even break stride as he carries me into the center of the meeting room. I can hear gasps, muttering in the wings. Someone tries to move some piece of paper out the way, a weird set of boxes with numerals inside. I don't know what I've seen, but I know I've seen too much of it. I'm pulled to my knees, waiting for the cold nose of a gat to be placed against my head. Instead, I just watch as some blurry figure steps out in front of me and, in a voice that sounds like Mr. Sousa's, one word gets said. Disappointing. I woke up in my bed at home, with an awful headache, but, Luckily, not a permanent one. Al already knew what had happened. He was filled in by Torrio, who gave him one of his man-to-man speeches about respecting people's business. According to Torrio, Sousa gave Al a month to make arrangements, to ensure he and his people wouldn't be disturbed like that again. Something about an apology was thrown about as well, but Al laughed at the idea. In fact, Al laughed the whole thing off, said he had a right to know what was going on under his nose, and that he wouldn't take any quarter from the likes of Sousa. But I could tell he was worried. Worried that someone could scare Torrio so bad, worried what might happen if he didn't apologize. After a month had passed, Mr. Sousa met the boss at his booth. This was in violation of an express contract. A contract which was agreed upon by all parties involved. I watched Mr. Sousa talk down to the boss, all sorts of calm through it all. I've only seen a few people speak to Al like that, and I never saw much of him afterwards. I don't believe you're aware of the significant amounts of protection your organization receives from our chapter in Washington. We don't need your protection. Al speaks for the first time in a while, cutting Sousa off with a hidden fury in his voice. When the limey replies, you can tell he ain't scared. Mr. Capone. He begins, taking a sip of his drink and setting it down. I was willing to let this transgression pass, but my organization is accustomed to certain standard of restitution. You have made no apology. You have made no assurances to us. Therefore, I'm afraid immediate punitive action will be taken. Al locks eyes with the man across from him. Neither of them blink as the thread hangs in the open air. There'd better be an April Fool's at the end of that sentence. Sousa laughs. I believe it's too late for that, isn't it? It's past noon. Mr. Sousa sets down his drink, stands up, and makes his way to the door. If it weren't for Torrio's blessing, Al would never have let him get that far. He thinks he can touch me? He's got nothing. Al snarls to me as watches Sousa cross the street. What does he think he's gonna do? I laugh a little, and nod along with his words. But there was something about the way Sousa carried himself, something about the discussions I heard that day. For the briefest moment, we got a glimpse of something. Something that seemed bigger than the both of us, a new outfit that neither of us knew anything about. I'll always remember that afternoon, as he raged against Sousa, yelling how there was no way the limey could get to him. I thought I saw something behind the anger in his eyes. For the first time since I'd known him, Al looked afraid. My feet crunch against a long gravel pathway. I've spent the past half hour on a quiet uphill climb through an old forest preserve. The birds are just starting to wake up around me, singing from the battered, time-worn oaks that stretch out in every direction. The death of Martin and Maria Towers had been covered on the radio throughout the night. Apparently, the pair had been led from their car to a nearby stretch of forest, and executed without struggle. There weren't many more details beyond that, except that the Towers' car was undamaged, and they hadn't been forced to a stop. They'd pulled over to greet their killer. The voice on the phone had given me detailed description of where I needed to go, telling me not to write anything down and to ensure that the last stretch of ground was completed on foot. It had taken me the whole night to get here. After another 10 minutes, stepping quietly through the pale morning chill, I pass under a rusting iron toll gate, and I find myself in front of a large log cabin. 2 stories of dilapidated wooden paneling, besieged by creeping ivy which stretches up the walls and through the half-broken windows. Walking in a wide circle, keeping close to the tree line, it becomes clear that the only proper entrance seems to be at the front of the house, a black metal door that faces the path I'd just taken. It looks like it was installed far more recently than everything around it. The place looks deserted. I reach my hand into my bag, and softly grip the stun gun I snatched up from my apartment. It's possible that the man on the phone had my best interests at heart, that all he wants to do is talk. But I'm already taking enough chances and, if half of what I'd heard recently was true, vigilance seems like its own reward. The metal door is unlocked. It creaks as I slowly step inside. The first room is small, with another iron door on the opposite wall. It looks like one part of a larger hallway, converted into a makeshift atrium and with sheet metal propped up along the walls and ceiling. The room is otherwise featureless, except for a small box, welded into the far door and covered by a lid. Making my way towards it, I run my hands across the sides. Eventually, I find a set of narrow hinges across the top of the box and, slowly, I swing the lid up. As soon as the case opens, my blood runs cold. A lattice of wires and circuit boards fill up almost every inch of space within the container, wrapped together with neat rows of black tape. Beneath them, I can see a circular disc of dark green metal, the wires feeding inside at different junctures. The obscured symbols M14 are written across the front. At the middle of the maze of electronics, The repurposed display of a digital watch reads 2 o'clock. The moment I see this, by some unseen mechanism, the door behind me swings shut, an electronic buzz and a hard thunk indicating an electronic lock. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice comes from every direction at once. From the droning, artificial quality, I can tell it's being delivered through an intercom. It's the same man who spoke to me over the phone last night. That same high-pitched tone, gentle, assured and unsettlingly calm. "I want you to think about what you've done. You should have just enough time." 1:59. The display on the digital watch screen starts to run down. 2 minutes, becomes 1:55, becomes 1:50. My heart immediately bursts into my throat as the first few seconds tick away. Struck dumb by the almost incomprehensible circumstance before me. For a brief moment, I'm unable to breathe, unable to swallow back an almost primal surge of all-encompassing panic. 1:48. Regaining control of my senses, I swing around to the outer door, twisting the small metal handle frantically, running my fingers along the edges of the sturdy frame for any conceivable flaw. Finding nothing, I pull back and kick the door with all my might. I feel a shudder down my ankle as my foot thuds against the unyielding metal. 1:13. My focus snaps to the room, glancing across the walls, floor and ceiling, desperately scanning for any inconsistency, any weakness in this old, dilapidated house. 0:58. With stilted breath, I turn back to the strange object that's pulling every last shred of hope from the room. The maze of wiring and circuitry, enveloping a hard case of military hardware, will either kill me or leave me grievously injured if allowed to run down. Even so, the idea of accidentally causing it to activate early is almost as terrifying as watching the clock tick to 0. 0:48. I push the wires aside, reaching towards the dark green disc at the far back, examining every wire that leads into the thick metal casing. 0:40. With no idea what these wires might do, and no idea what might happen if I remove them, the only thing I can think to do is pull out every wire that leads into the metal casing, ensuring that no signal can be delivered to whatever lies inside. I can only hope there isn't a failsafe built in, or the device might trigger with the slightest act of tampering. 0:34. I can feel the tears form in my eyes, as my shaking hands grip the wires. With a whimpering scream I wrench as many wires as I can from the device. 0:20. I stare at the clock, as it continues to count down. In a final frenzy of hopeless despair, I grasp at every loose piece of circuitry, tearing it from the door until I'm left with my hands full of plastic and metal, watching the final numbers count down. 0:10. In the midst of the final 10 seconds, I turn away from the sight in front of me. Closing my eyes, I think about my dad, how he's about to wake up in a world with no idea where I am, no idea what's become of me. I wonder if he'll ever hear about me again. It's my final thought as I brace for an impact that I'll never even feel. 0:04. 0:03. 0:02. 0:01. 0 o'clock. After a moment of darkness, I open my eyes. 4 zeros lie across the digital watch face. What should have been the final second of my life, frozen in place. I jump at the sound of the latch turning, my brain on a hair trigger for any mechanical noise. Slowly the inner door opens to reveal a bare wooden hallway. At the center of the frame, stands a man I've never seen before. "I apologize," a familiar, soft voice begins. I needed to. Without another word, I've pulled the stun gun from my bag and fired. The prongs hit the man in the shoulder and he instantly convulses into a jerking, writhing mess that collapses forwards onto the floor. Stepping out of the metal container onto the creaking beams of the old cabin hallway, I kneel down, take his still twitching wrists and bind them together, the twisted lengths of wire I took from the bomb casing forming a strict restraint. "Walk." I pull the man to his feet and force him down the corridor. He stumbles over his own feet, a distinct limp displaying itself as we make our way to the room at the end of the hall. We march into a large room, held together by thick wooden beams and lit by bare electric lights. Every inch of wall is taken up with maps, newspaper clippings and photocopies of redacted documents. A desktop with a row of screens displays upwards of 20 camera feeds from across the forest. He's been watching me since I left the road. There's a table in the center of the room, containing a bunch of unwashed dishes, a stack of random documents and a blocky, pre-90s portable computer. I pull out a chair and drop the man into it. He groans as he comes back into the picture. Are you crazy?" His attempt at a yell leaves his mouth as a pained wheeze. "Am I crazy? Are you fucking serious?" As I yell at the man, It occurs to me that my therapist wouldn't be happy with any of this. I stare the man down while I wait for him to speak. He's around the same age as Ralph, lithe and narrow-featured, his thin face covered with a messy mop of gray hair. He looks scruffy, his hair unwashed, his skin pale. God knows how long he has been living here, an old man in a broken house in a long-forgotten forest. You were never in any danger. He coughs out, defeatedly. Then why did you put me in a room with a fucking landmine? It wasn't a. It was the only way to know. In that moment, the threat seems to fall away from the man, at least partially. I can almost believe that he doesn't want to harm me, but, if that's the case, then his actions feel even more unspeakable. I'm sorry? I meet the man's eyes, anger still coursing through every fiber of my body. The man looks down at the ground, almost ashamed, then after a few seconds, doubles down and looks back up to me with renewed conviction. The charge was a dud, but the mechanism was built to match a standard improvised explosive device. It could be disarmed in the time frame, but you'd have to be a genius. Geniuses are the only people they'd send. I stare at the guy, almost disbelievingly. So it was a test? And I passed because I was too dumb to solve it? I suppose. If you want to put it like that. The man shuffles uncomfortably in his chair. As the adrenaline starts to ebb away, and my heart rate drops, I realize that I maybe shouldn't have fired on the guy, especially considering his age. Then again, he shouldn't have locked me in a room and tricked me into thinking I'd entered the final 2 minutes of my life. I guess we've both been shitty people today. You could have just given me a word jumble or something. No. It wouldn't work if you knew you were being tested. You could realize what I was testing for and just play dumb. Of course you could be playing dumb right now. That's always a risk. He pauses. But from how you're acting at the moment, I'd say you haven't got anything figured out, have you? I don't know if there's a challenge in his voice, or if his multiple slights on my intelligence were causing me to infer it, but I feel a sudden urge to prove I'm not a total idiot. On the phone, last night, you said I went to your house. I'm half talking to myself, getting the thoughts lined up in my head, but I can read in his face that I'm right. Ralph gave me 2 addresses. I continue. Yours was one of them, the other was Roger's. The only reason you'd be in that group is if you helped Ralph steal those journals. He regards me for a moment, then he looks away. Well, that's obvious. I roll my eyes at his snarky dismissal, though I'm suddenly feeling a little more at ease. As crazy as this guy seems to be, as unforgivably fucked up as his first impression was, I've clearly convinced him that I'm not his enemy, which I hope means he isn't mine either. Still, I'm not untying him until I understand what's going on. Walter is my name. The man begins. And yes, I was with Ralph and Roger during the show. And I was there for everything that came after. He rests back in his chair. I can tell he's thinking back through those past 30 years. What happened between you guys? Walter sighs. You mind making some coffee? I just woke up when you set off my alarms. I'm not usually up this early. I almost laugh at his request. Then I realize I could probably use a cup as well. Over the next few minutes, I keep my eyes on the guy as I make my way over to an old, partially broken coffee maker, pour in enough water for 2 cups from a small brass tap, and let it run. He doesn't seem to try anything, but as I arrive back in my chair, with nothing in the air but the juddering sound of the coffee maker, he lifts his hands up as a meek gesture. Do you mind untying? Talk. The old man drops his hands and shuffles uncomfortably, preparing his story as the coffee maker whirs in the background. Well, we stole the journals. Then we read them. We saw the forces we were dealing with and well, it broke us apart. In what way? Walter looks at me with total confusion. Isn't it clear? You've read it, right? I mean, goddamn, it's the fucking Illuminati. His voice grows impassioned, almost angry. It's the New World Order. It's the force behind the curtain. Those journals contain the only recorded interaction with an organization we otherwise have no evidence of. An organization which apparently influences the advancement of our world. Do you have any idea what they'd do if they found out that we'd read them? You're really that scared of them? That's right, and you should be scared too. He leans back in his chair. They're the real deal, Ms. Polanka. My research over the years has shown me as much, but I realized what we were dealing with right then and there. I wanted the journals destroyed, removed from existence before someone found out that we had them. Roger disagreed, didn't care about Suzo or his people at all. He was itching to sell all 3 journals to the highest bidder as soon as the heat cleared. And Ralph? Ralph? He was right down the middle. He was worried about Sousa same as me, knew selling the journals could be the end of us, but he just couldn't bring himself to destroy them. Walter takes a moment, soberly gathering his thoughts. I can tell the story is about to get unpleasant. For a while we just didn't talk about it. We were more worried about being discovered, by the studio, by the crew, by Sousa's people. Once we knew no one was coming for us, that was when the arguments began. Roger wanted to sell, I wanted them gone. Ralph tried to fight the middle ground, kept the journals in his house since we only trusted him to keep hold of them. The coffee maker shudders to a halt, spitting dark liquid out of a broken nozzle. I keep my eyes on Walter as I pour out 2 full coffee cups and place one into his hands. With some difficulty he raises it to his mouth and takes a pained sip. I was happy with Ralph keeping them, as long as I could keep an eye on him. But Roger? He grew angrier with every passing day. In his mind we were holding his fortune to ransom. Those journals were going to bring him everything he wanted, fix everything that was wrong with his life. First he complained, then he yelled, then Walter gestures to his leg, the one he'd been limping on earlier. He came after me first. He knew Ralph wouldn't tell him where he put the journals, wanted me as leverage. Cracked my leg in 2 places to stop me running, held me in my own home for 48 hours while he waited on Ralph to meet his demands. Did Ralph give him the journals? Walter sighs. Roger set up a location to meet, told Ralph no cops, no tricks. Of course Ralph agreed. Roger threw me in the trunk of his car, took me out to the edge of town. When he opens the trunk again he's the angriest I've ever seen him. Picks me up, throws me to the ground and drives away. Walter takes a gulp of coffee. Ralph didn't show up at the meet, in fact I didn't see him again for another 30 years. He cleared out his apartment while Roger was holding me, disappeared in a puff of smoke and took the journals with him. Suppose it was the best idea, Roger didn't get what he wanted and I lost my use as a hostage. Are you surprised that Roger let you go? Why not? I wasn't worth anything to him, and he knew I was too scared to call the cops. Walter shakes his head. We never heard from Ralph again. Roger tried everything, eventually joined the Chicago Police Department, no other reason but to help him track down his precious journals. He had a pretty illustrious career but he never found Ralph. Not until recently, that is. I feel the dull thud of a stone dropping in my stomach. Roger found him? Walter visibly sinks down, then responds with a meek nodding action. I tried to find him first. He says, a break in his voice. I just managed it as well. Found him living alone not too far away, with this whole other life. But it was too late. Roger got to him around the same time. They said he died of natural causes. Of course they did. Roger was a cop for 20 years. He knows what the police look for. You ever wonder why the police came by your place so quickly after he executed the towers? Wait. He's framing me? Walter shrugs, as if to say I guess so. In light of what I've learned, I'm becoming increasingly glad that I jumped out the window when the cops came by my apartment. What I thought might have been a misunderstanding was now something much darker and, if it came down to it, the testimony of an ex-juvenile offender versus the word of a retired cop. I know who I'd bet on. Fuck. Fuck indeed. Walter takes another sip of coffee. Roger wants the journals. After what happened with Ralph, he could have 1, 2 or none in his possession, but he certainly doesn't have them all. He's not going to stop until he gets them, and if ruining your life somehow helps him then that's what he'll do. But he's not the one you're hiding from, is he? He looks up at me, then briefly glances around the room. It's as if he's just realized what this place looks like from an outsider's point of view, the countless stacks of circled photographs, decades worth of strange documentation that litter the otherwise neglected space. There's someone else in the room, and maybe there has been for the past 30 years, their presence is written over every surface. Sousa's organization has remained with Walter since the day he read those journals. You've looked into them? I ask, the implication hanging in the air. Walter nods. When he next speaks, his voice is almost instinctively lowered. I know more about the organization than anyone else on this planet, and I know almost nothing. Well, what do you know? I know they're still out there. He whispers. I know they never went away. Sure, the Chicago outfit held power over a city in the early 1900s, but these guys, they've held the world in their hands for centuries. They recruit the brightest minds in every generation, and they're capable of removing anyone who gets in their way. How many of the journals have you read? Just 1. Ralph's, I'm guessing? Well, trust me, Colosimo and Frank Capone were child's play compared to what they can do. Maybe I'll let you read mine sometime, they really step up their game. I thought you didn't have your journal. I look over at him curiously. I have the most important entry as an encrypted file in here. He nods his head towards the old computer. Along with a lot of other useful stuff. Password's a military secret, of course. Walter places his hands against the table and lifts himself onto his feet. Anyway, there's nothing I want from you that we can't discuss later. In the meantime, do you mind? He holds out his wire-bound wrists towards me. I stare at him for a moment, taking the time to reload the cartridge of my stun gun. Another shot with that thing would probably kill me, you know. He states seriously. Best not try anything then. Half joking, I start to pick apart the knot I made in the wire. As the day passes, I start to get a more developed idea of the man Walter is. Once I let him go, he makes no attempts on me. In fact, he makes a point of showing me the exits to the building in case the police track this place down. With nothing else to do, I take the time to look through his research. The pins on the wall-mounted map span far beyond Illinois, their dates of activity far beyond the Prohibition era. Sousa's organization is apparently much older than I could have imagined, their residence in the Chicago tunnels just a small step on a seemingly timeless journey. A dozen documents line the walls, the final transmissions of Amelia Earhart, the 1954 guest list of a hotel in Oosterbeek, an 18-page transcript with 3 speakers, Richard, Bob and unknown. Hastily circled lines across every page paint a strange, esoteric picture. I make a note to read through them all later. In the early afternoon, having looked through everything Walter has on display, I sit down in one of the chairs as the strange old man tends to his house. Having been awake all night, I place my folded arms on the table and rest my head against them, seeking the respite of a half-hour nap. It's dark outside when Walter shakes me awake. "We need to leave now," he says, his voice quivering, his eyes alight with alarm. I raise my head from the desk and stare at Walter, then I look over his shoulder at the camera monitors. A dark shadow is passing up the gray gravel path at harrowing speed. "Is it the police?" "No." Walter almost whispers. "No. It's him." The words drop from Walter's mouth, each syllable weighted with dread. Looking down at his shaking hands, I can see he's holding a silver, .22 caliber handgun. I grasp for my bag, pulling myself to my feet. I can hear the distant sound of tires on gravel as whatever's outside rolls to a halt. The slamming of a car door is followed by a series of quick footsteps. Then nothing at all. He'd know I have cameras set up. He's trying to rush us. "Come on." Walter grabs my arm and attempts to force me out of the room. "Where are we going?" "I have a car out back." Walter sounds more panicked with every word as he limps through to the back of the house, leading me to the rear door. "I knew bringing you here was a mistake. Not your fault, you weren't prepared." Walter admonishes both of us as he checks through a hole in the wooden door and unbolts all 4 locks. He rests his hand on the door, as if building up the courage to face the world outside. There's a small path through the woods that leads onto the rear road. He whispers, "I got the car hidden there. Keep low and keep quiet." Walter desperately tries to follow his own advice as he walks unevenly over a bed of leaves and rock. As we pass between the branches, as we get a brief view of the gravel road far behind us, I can see the deep red Chevrolet, waiting in the darkness for its owner to return. Roger himself is nowhere to be seen around the cabin. But through my tired and fearful eyes, every falling shadow takes the form of his looming figure. Glancing over my shoulder, I hear Walter pick up the pace. Turning back around, I see him impatiently stumbling towards the dark green mound that stands in a small clearing. Branches snap underfoot as we close the precious few meters towards the empty patch of woodland, the mound slowly revealing itself as a cover of green netting lying across an old sedan. Leaving the house behind us, we creep into the clearing. "Wait," Walter attempts to speak as he sees the moonlight streaming across the hood of the car. It's been lifted up. Moments later, a dark, hulking figure steps out from behind the raised sheet of metal. Roger stares at us with a sickening smile, a gun held at his side as he brushes his gloved hand against his jacket, wiping off the remains of a slick, pearlescent liquid. As my eyes travel down, I can see a thin trickle of gasoline spilling out onto the ground from the car's chassis. "Something's wrong with your fuel lines, Walter." Walter doesn't hesitate. With a panicked whimper, he sweeps up a shaking gun and immediately fires. The bullet slams into Roger, hitting him center mass. The thud of the impact is followed by a hard grunt. In immediate response, Roger swings his gun arm around and fires 2 shots from a Glock into Walter's already injured leg. The noise of each shot is deafening, but it dies quickly in the dark, deserted forest. Walter's cries don't fade as quickly. He falls to the ground cradling his bleeding leg, wailing into the indifferent night air. Roger looks winded, pained, but perplexingly resilient to the effect of Walter's shot. "See, I came prepared." Roger steps forward, unbuttoning the top 2 buttons of his coat to reveal a thick, black, polymer vest. Top of the line. That was a fast draw, though, I'll give you that. Walter tries to raise his gun again, but Roger has already reached him. He presses Walter's gun arm down with a hard leather boot, and kicks his automatic back towards the car, where it lies out of Walter's and my reach. I'm frozen in place, staring at the gun in Roger's hand. Even without it, the man towers over me, easily capable of knocking me down with a single blow. How did you find me?" Walter cries. Roger laughs. He looks like he'll take great pleasure in answering that question. "Oh, I've always known where you were, Walter. I'm on all your forums too. Been keeping a close eye. You never wondered why I found Ralph the same time you did?" Roger smiles as Walter's eyes grow wide with horror. "It's almost over." Roger continues. "I got 2 of them, yours and mine. I just need Ralph's and you'll never see me again." Roger leans in close to Walter, whilst still keeping me firmly within his line of sight. "If not for your sake, then for hers, tell me where it is." Tears start to flow down Walter's cheeks as he replies. I clutch my bag instinctively close as I wait for his reply. "It's..." Walter turns around to face me. He looks terrified. He then turns back to Roger, breathing through the pain. "It's a military secret." In the brief seconds that passed between us, I saw his fear, but I also glimpsed look of defiance and determination in his eyes. In that moment, I knew he's not going to tell Roger where the last journal is, at least not for now. Instead, I have a feeling he's risked the almost certain threat of pain and torment to tell me something important. In that instant, I think I know what he wants me to do. I can only hope I've got it right. Roger's brow furrows at the answer. Without a word, he raises his gun high above his head and throws it down with full force. I hear it crack sickeningly against Walter's head as the impact drives his cheek against the ground. An injured, defeated yelp escapes from Walter's mouth, followed by desperate gasps as he tries to battle a tidal wave of pain. In his swift punishment of Walter, Roger's eyes leave me for just a second, but it's time enough for me to pull the stun gun out of my bag and point it right at his chest, willing myself steady, knowing I only have 1 shot. Roger smiles. "Do you have a license for that?" He taps his chest. "I'm sorry, doll, but if a bullet can't get through here." I pulled the trigger on the stun gun. I hardly see as the prongs as they scissor through the night air. As soon as they land against Roger's chest, I turn and run, a wave of heat bursting out behind me as the gasoline on his jacket ignites. I hear Roger yell in frustration, the frantic struggling with his jacket. Then, far too quickly, a bullet whizzes past my shoulder as I duck into the trees and back to the cabin. As my feet hammer against the soft ground, I hear a final yell from Walter as he fights to hold Roger back. I focus on the space ahead of me and try to block out the noise. I burst into the back door of the cabin, stumble into the main room and make my way towards the old computer on the table. As I haul it up, the weight hits me. It's bulky and awkward, but at least it lifts up in a single piece. Walter wanted me to save it. I hear a frantic yell, followed by 2 more gunshots deep in the forest. Carrying the computer under my arm, I sprint down the hallway through the metal room and back outside. I can hear Roger leaving the forest as I sprint over to his car. Finding the door unlocked, I climb in and rest the computer on the passenger seat, next to an old, portable police siren. I'd stolen a car before, an act which led to one of the most awful moments of my life. I never dreamed I'd be doing it again, but as I forcefully hammer and tear away at the panel adjacent to the antiquated 3-spoke steering wheel, I find myself right back where I was at 17 years old. I can hear Roger marching through the cabin. It won't be long until he arrives out the other side and sees exactly what I'm trying to do. As I manage to roughly cut away at the plastic casings of the ignition and battery wires, I look up to see the figure of Roger, his dark silhouette at the threshold of the cabin. He covers the ground towards the gravel road quickly, crossing under the shadows of the trees and back into the moonlight. In a brief moment, as he's revealed by a break in the canopy, I see his arms start to raise. Instinctively I throw myself down against the passenger seat, my head hitting the corner of the old computer as 3 shots echo through the night and the windshield explodes shattered glass onto the leather seats. In a last-ditch attempt, I drop the handbrake, feeling a lurch as the car rolls backwards down the hill and back to the road. A crescendo of gravel crackling and snapping as I accelerate away from the cabin. I can hear a separate hammering on the gravel path in front of me, as Roger battles to keep pace with the car. As two more shots echo into the night, one ricocheting off the metal of the car, I grab the wires and force the exposed copper together. The engine roars into life. I throw the car into reverse and accelerate backwards, steering from below the dashboard into the gap in the tree line, using it to keep the car straight. As I hear Roger's faltering steps quickly fade into the night, I pull myself up and press my foot onto the gas. Minutes later, I feel a distinct lurch as the back wheels level out, and see the environment shift instantly as I burst out of the tree line onto the main road. Sick of reversing all that way, I'm relieved to I-shift into first and leave the forest in my rearview mirror. There's not much to say about the rest of the night. I managed to ditch the car near a small town, walk the next few miles to a small bus station and catch the very next one out in the morning. I skirt around Lake Michigan in the direction of Chicago and ask to get off once I see a cheap-looking motel. I give a false name, pay in cash and put a "Do Not Disturb" sign on the door. As soon as I twist the lock, I set up the old computer and attempt to boot it up. It's been thrown around a lot tonight, but it still manages to turn on quickly enough. The password screen shows a generic background, a picture of a sunrise over the island, as well as a space for a 12-digit code. It takes me a while to figure out what the access code is based on Walter's clue, and I won't spoil it for anyone who wants to figure it out for themselves. But once I manage to get through, the screen explodes into a stack of files and folders. I spend over 2 hours searching through them, running on fumes and the sort of black tar coffee that 2-star customer service provides. I find another one of those strange chessboards, as well as a link to that strange web ring people have been messaging me about. It looks like it's connected after all. After another half hour, I finally stumble across Walter's transcription of his journal entry, nestled in the back of some cryptically named folder. I've left it below for you guys to read through. After I finished typing everything up, I have to say I felt at a bit of a loss. In every idle moment I could feel Roger searching for me, making plans against me with hands that had already killed at least 3 people. His connections within the police, the possible threat of Sousa's organization, and my developing connection with the death of the Towers have isolated me completely. I can't go to the authorities, I can't go home, I can't go anywhere near my father with all this trouble following behind me. After a moment, however, as I stare at the virtual sunrise on the computer, with the real-life dawn far, far away, I start to feel something other than loneliness and fear. I start to get angry at the world I've found myself in, angry at the pain and exhaustion it has caused me, and most of all, angry at the figure behind it all, Roger, who's refused to let me out of a world I never wanted any part in. I'm going to sleep now, but once I finally recover from the past 2 nights of lethargy, fear and torment, I'm going to find some way to turn the tables on Roger. I have something he wants, something he needs, and I'm going to make sure he never gets a hold of it. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to find a way to stop Roger from ruining my life. Then I'm going to ruin his. Journal entry, 1925. The next time we met Mr. Sousa, Al had half a mind to kill him. The meeting had been set up by Sousa himself, with the blessing of Torrio. Al wasn't sure why the guy wanted to talk with him, but he wasn't going to pass up a chance for a confrontation. More than a year had passed since Al's last meeting with Mr. Sousa. After breaching the man's trust and refusing to apologize, Sousa had announced immediate punitive action would be taken. Al had shrugged it off as a hollow threat, but later that same day, a couple of Johns in civilian clothing pulled up to the polling station on Cicero Avenue and, without warning, opened fire on some nearby hoods. Of the 3 who found themselves under fire, 2 managed to get away. The only one who didn't make it was Frank Capone, Al's big brother. The grief came first. A coffin plated with silver, a motorcade more than 100 cars long, more flowers than I'd ever seen in one place. Al spared no expense in putting his brother to rest. He even closed his businesses for a time, something I never thought he'd do, just to ensure everybody had time to contemplate Frank's loss. As soon as he stepped out of the Mount Carmel cemetery, the anger set in. But even through the rage, Al was a survivor. He was smart enough to know that he was dealing with someone powerful. Colosimo and Frank had been removed perfectly, with the culprit either in endless dispute, or protected by the full force of the law. If Sousa was responsible for both, then he had men on both sides of the city working for him. Al has all kinds of anger inside of him. This one burned cold, a patient rage that he kept under wraps, until he knew for sure what Sousa had done, until he had his chance for revenge. When his chance came, it was me, Sousa and Al, sitting alone on a quiet street beside one of Al's cafes. Al laid out his accusation to Souza, ready to hear his response. He wasn't ready for how calmly Souza confirmed his suspicions. "There are two things I must tell you, before you take any action." Souza stared blankly at Al, but I got a sense that he wasn't as confident as he was letting on. "I should warn you, and I consider this the least important reason to keep me alive, that it would not be without consequence." Souza looks down, as if he finds it distasteful to say what comes next. "Out of the world's 10 best recorded marksmen, 8 are under my organization's direct employ, and 3 of them currently serve as my own personal guard. They are swift in their actions, both preemptive and retaliatory." I look around the buildings as he says so. I can tell Al's doing the same. I don't see nobody, but after all my dealings with Souza, I take the man at his word. Souza continues. "Secondly, the action taken against you was not my choice. I believe I said as much at the time." He looks at me. Al follows and nods for me to tell him what I heard that day. He did say. I stumble over the words. He was willing to let the transgression pass, but his organization was accustomed to a certain standard of restitution. A grim way to put it, in retrospect. Souza sips his tea. I protested the decision, as best I could, but eventually I was deemed too close to events in question. I had no sway over the punishment's final form. What little influence I had was expended, when I convinced them to spare both your lives. "And why would you do that?" Al growls. "Like I said, I am a scientist, and an investor in people. You are currently the subject of an experiment which I have taken a personal interest in." "Experiment?" Souza smiles briefly. "My organization is comprised of this century's greatest minds, across the scientific, political, and philosophical realms. I hypothesize that the successful criminal mind could represent an untapped resource for our order. That such a honed and unique intelligence, accustomed to high strategy and free from moral constraint, deserves a place amongst our ranks. You want me to join your little outfit? Should the experiment prove successful?" "Huh. And what's in it for me?" "An empire, beyond anything you could previously have imagined." Souza knew he didn't need to say anything else. "I've been looking to make the proposal for a while." He continues. "If you accept, then you will be given a fair chance to prove yourself. We will continue to host our meetings in the tunnels and, perhaps someday, you will be able to attend yourself. Of course, if you aren't willing to accept these terms, then we shall speak no more of it." Al thinks for a moment, all thoughts of Frank's death pushed to the back of his mind. A moment later, he stuffs a few bills into my hand and sends me off for another round of drinks. I'm not sure what they talked about while I was away, but things started to happen as quickly as that afternoon. With the meeting over, me and the boss were driving through the streets of the city. The powerful silence in the car was broken by gunfire, hammering against us from the street. Luckily, the extra protection Al had put on his personal car held fast, sparing everyone inside. Al seemed worried by the attack, dropped out of public sight for a few days after. At first I thought Mr. Souza had double-crossed us, or maybe he had nothing to do with it whatsoever. About 2 weeks later, on January 25th, Torrio was shot 3 times outside his apartment, a final bullet to the head mercifully jamming in the chamber. Al came to Torrio's side straight away, low profile be damned, and immediately set a guard outside his hospital room as the man recovered. It all seemed like a load of bad luck, and a whole load of ill will on behalf of the North Side gang. But there was a part of me that thought different, and the more I thought about it, the more perfect it all seemed. See, Torrio was popular. He was the undisputed boss of the Chicago outfit, and in a world of backstabbing and betrayal, there was no way to move against the guy without turning the whole gang against you. I started to wonder, what if the attack on Al's car were staged, so that everyone would think his life was being threatened in the same way as Torrio's? In the same way, the attempt on Torrio's life, with gun jamming against his head, made everyone think the hoods had wanted Torrio dead. The more I thought about it, the less I saw it as a string of bad luck for the outfit. I think, in the worst possible way, it was a gift from Souza to Al. By the end of the year, Torrio had left for Italy and, as anyone would have predicted, he handed the entire operation over to Al. It should have been the best day of the boss's life. But something changed in Al, over the year, after seeing how casually Souza had dealt with Colosimo, Frank, and how quickly he'd engineered the fall of Johnny Torrio. I think Al hoped he'd be freed by his deal with Souza, that he'd finally have a chance to be the boss. But I think he realized that he was simply serving a new master. Less sympathetic, with motives he didn't understand, and capable of tearing anyone down, anybody, in a matter of weeks. Al had never been bigger, but he'd never felt smaller and, though he could now do everything he ever wanted, all he saw was the cage. It's become hard to close my eyes. Even after my body crashed, as that river of adrenaline finally ran dry and my mind tumbled into the gaping chasm left in its wake. Even after my aching bones and empty muscles begged for sleep, it still took everything within me to shut down the computer, draw the curtains and turn off the light. To be honest, I'm scared of what might happen if I do. A primal state of hyper-awareness accompanies me now, and has done since the previous night, filling every passing second with a low-key paranoia. Creaks in the adjacent rooms, cars passing in the distance, all the random sounds of the outside world have started to feel connected, as if each noise was part of an intricate web of conspiracy closing in around me. I can see how Walter became so paranoid in his 30 years of isolation. I've spent less than 3 days in this strange new world and I'm already jumping at shadows. I'd spent the rest of the morning in the hotel, laying low, taking a brief rest and, most importantly, planning my next move. As far as I was aware, at least 2 forces were on the lookout for me right now: the cops, looking to take me in concerning the murder of Ralph's stepchildren, and Roger, who wanted Ralph's journal and was clearly willing to do anything to get hold of it. I briefly considered giving in, mailing the journal to Roger and hoping that he calls off his friends in the police department, that he rescinds whatever bullshit evidence links me to the crime. But hope wasn't going to cut it anymore. There was no way I could trust the man to keep his word and, even if I could, I can't sit back and ignore what's happened in the past 24 hours. Roger murdered my best friend, he'd killed at least 2 other people in the meantime and he's dragged me into something I wanted no part in. There's no way I could run and hide from this anymore. If I was going to get out of this situation, I needed to go on the offensive, and I had to move quickly. I buy a few bags of potato chips, cashews, and 2 bottles of water from the hotel lobby. I snack idly as I wait for the afternoon to roll around. Then I get a bus into the city. I realize taking any mode of transportation is a risk. I don't know if my image has been passed around by the cops and I can almost feel the eyes of each passenger burning into me with every passing glance, but there's no other way of getting back around Lake Michigan, and back to Chicago in time. Once I get into the city, I take the essentials out of my bag, my remaining cash, the taser with 1 final cartridge, Ralph's journal and my supplies for the day. Then I inconspicuously leave the bag in a public area, containing my reassembled phone, my credit card and a hastily scrawled PIN number on some note paper. It should be a bag thief's dream, an unlocked phone and the credit card of some naive airhead. Giving it away will most likely fuck with my already bad credit rating, but, if it gets used, it should hopefully send Roger in the wrong direction for a while. After about 20 minutes, I stare back across the street to where I left my bag, finding it gone. Looks like the criminal element of Chicago is still going strong. Speaking of which, it's the early evening by the time I hit Rogers Road. I stay off the street and pass through a small footpath behind the houses as I make my way towards Rogers' home. The sun has already gone down, a set of old street lights flickering on, barely illuminating the sidewalk. I find a good spot on an idle back street, and keep watch on the Rogers' neat little home. Nothing exceptional happens for an hour or so, but I can tell he's inside. Every so often, a light flickers on and off, and I get a vague sense of the man moving through his house. Occasionally, I see his shadow linger at the window for what feels like a little too long. A sudden pang of fear expands through my chest every time it happens, and I'm temporarily convinced that I've been noticed. About an hour and a half into my silent vigil, I suddenly see the garage door start to rise up. Before it even finishes rising, a rental car pulls out with a sense of reckless urgency. The car swerves onto the road in an untidy arc, and I get the briefest glimpse of Roger, his hands gripped on the wheel as the driver's seat passes beneath the street lamps. Judging by his speed, by the roar of desperation that echoes from the car's engine as it rockets down the street, I can only assume that one of his contacts in the police has tipped him off, either about my card being activated or my phone being switched on somewhere in the wider city. It's only a matter of time before they track down the person involved and realize I had nothing to do with it, at which point Roger could come straight back home. In his hurry, Roger hasn't even waited for his garage door to close fully. I watch as it starts to descend back to its original position. That could be the best chance I get. Throwing caution aside, I pull myself to my feet and sprint out of the alleyway. My footsteps hammer against the tarmac as I burst out onto the street and cross it as quickly as possible. The garage door is already half closed by the time I make it to the driveway. Praying nobody is looking, with no time to conceal what I'm doing, I throw myself toward the floor, feeling the metal of the shutter dig against my back as I scramble into the dark garage. As soon as I'm inside, I hear the clack of metal, the hum of the shutter cutting out as it reaches the floor. The room is cast into almost total blackness as I'm cut off from the outside world. For a few moments, the room is silent, except for the sound of my recovering breath. Picking myself up, I step quietly towards a faint rectangle of dark gray in the otherwise pitch-black room, the translucent screen door that leads into the house, which is casting the slightest amount of moonlight into the room. My breath catches in my throat as dark fabric brushes against my leg. Unable to see what it is, I rapidly back up to the screen door and swipe my hand across the adjacent wall, grasping for the light switch. Once I find it, and the dim sodium lights flicker on, I find myself staring at the same dark green covering that concealed Walter's sedan in the forest. Beneath the cover lies that very same car, parked haphazardly in the back of the large garage, boxes, work tables and shelves pushed to the side to make room for 2 vehicles. I don't know why he brought it here, or how for that matter, and despite my best intentions, both those questions get the better of me. I step back across the room, lifting the hood of the car. Despite Roger cutting them the previous night, the fuel lines are seemingly undamaged. In fact, it looks like a brand new pair have been affixed. I can only assume Walter had a few spare parts in the cabin as a contingency against breakdown, which Roger was quick to take advantage of. As I lower the hood, preparing to make my way into the house, I notice something on the back of the car. Resting on a small table near the covered trunk, I see a collection of used bandages, all of them stained with the cinnabar remnants of dried blood. A box of cleaning supplies sit on the table as well: bleach, ammonia, liquid soap and a bucket. Roger has used the car to transport Walter somewhere. Maybe he thought I might have tipped the cops off about the cabin. Maybe I should have. When I lift the cover off of the trunk, more evidence of last night's disturbing events comes to light. The chassis is covered in blood. I can imagine Walter's old, wounded body being forced against the car while Roger forced him inside. Finding the trunk unlocked, I brace myself for what I might find. As I slowly lift it up, I'm relieved to find it empty. Whatever he did with Walter, he ended up bringing the vehicle here, and it's clear that he hasn't finished the necessary cleanup required before he dumps the car. I'm glad I'm not the only one who's getting desperate. I make my way over to the interior garage door and try the handle. It gives way and, taking a deep breath, I carefully make my way into the hallway of Roger's house. Quickly and quietly, I travel room by room, looking for where the other 2 journals might be kept. It isn't difficult work, the place is well organized and practically bare. Before I knew what kind of man Roger really was, I'd viewed this sparse decor as a stylistic choice. Now? It feels like the house of a man who has made an impermanent life for himself, who has lived his every day with the intention of moving on to better things and, consequently, invested nothing into the life he had. The stairs creak as I make my way to the upper landing. Moving along the dark upper corridor, I push a door open to find the main bedroom. Moonlight streams in through the double windows, illuminating the room's few notable features. As modest as the rest of the house, the bedroom contains nothing more than a plain double bed, a nightstand with a lamp and a cordless phone, a wall-mounted TV and, straight ahead of the door, a large oak wardrobe. Far bigger than someone with such minimalistic tastes would need. Making my way over to it, I pull open the double doors to find a set of hanging clothes, a small set of drawers and, set upon a shelf at eye level, a large electronic safe. I take a breath, feeling the stillness of the empty house around me. Reaching an outstretched finger towards the safe, I press the 0 key. The screen immediately jumps into life, displaying a single 0, with 3 spare spaces remaining. Now that I know how many numbers I'm working with, I press clear and consider my options. Roger didn't seem to have many people in his life, which means he doesn't have too much of a reason to set a difficult combination to his personal safe. Even so, he'd likely stay away from birthdays or anything of public record. I don't have much to go on, but if everything I've learned about Roger is true, there's one date that's more personal to him than any other, a single year that he's been trapped in all this time. 1986. 2 doors open as I press enter. I hear an electronic hum as the safe swings slightly ajar, and a heavy slam as the front door to the house is thrown wide. Immediately after, I hear a set of thunderous footsteps making their way along the lower corridor, sweeping through the rooms with horrible efficiency. Before I can even react, I hear the steps come back to the hallway, making their way towards the stairs as Roger's angered voice echoes up through the otherwise silent house. "It's you, isn't it, you fucking bitch?" With almost no time to think, I grabbed the phone from the nightstand and slammed the bedroom door closed. I frantically examined the door handle, looking for a way to lock it from the inside. Finding nothing but an empty keyhole, with Roger making his way up the stairs, I sink to the floor, pressing my back against the wooden door and bracing my feet against the base of the heavy double bed. "You don't think I got alarms on this place? Just 'cause you can't hear him?" I hear Roger's furious yet sickeningly vindictive voice from the upper landing. As I hear his footsteps start to reach me, I do something I never thought I would, in my current position as a wanted person. 911, where is your emergency? I need the police, please, help me, please. I've been abducted, I'm at a guy's house. I whisper Roger's address frantically down the phone. I've locked myself in the garage but he's trying to kill me. I know I'm lying to the police, about what's happening, about where I am in the house. It's a lie that comes from deep at the back of my head, a calm voice that, unlike the rest of me, seems to know what it's doing. I watch the door handle twist repeatedly, then feel a sharp slamming against my back as Roger's heavy boot slams into the door. The force knocks me forward, straining my muscles and causing my bones to rattle. I manage to hold firm, but I know I won't be able to keep him at bay for long. "Okay, a car is being dispatched to your location now. Is this man armed?" "Yes, he had a gun, please." The phone is knocked out of my hand as a secondary slam throws me forward. The door gives way once again as I just manage to kick my body back and brace it against the door. I just need to hold out. It doesn't matter if I'm bruised, broken or concussed as long as I can keep this door closed for long enough. I hear Roger stepping back down the corridor, and manage to maintain my position just in time before he runs at the door with full force. The door slams into the back of my head, and I almost feel my kneecap give way as it fights to absorb the shock. I don't know how much more I can take but, mercifully, I receive the briefest respite as I hear Roger move back down the corridor and down the stairs. Shortly after, I hear him lock the front door. I don't know what he's planning to do, but I know it's nothing good. Part of me is screaming to throw the bedroom door open and sprint outside, but I get a distinct feeling that's what he wants me to do, and with the entrance locked, there's no way I can make a break for the front door without him catching me. Moving out of my position against the door, I run up to the windows and pull back on the handle. The window opens only slightly, a thin gap at the top of the frame, refusing to give way further even after I throw my whole weight behind it. Listening for Roger's not-so-distant footsteps, I run to the lamp on the nightstand. I grab the cord, ripping it from its socket and taking the now untethered object back to the window. Taking 2 quick breaths, I hammer the base of the lamp against the window pane. The metal hits the toughened glass surface and bounces back. Before I can try a second time, I hear Roger storm back upstairs. With nothing else to do, as I hear him complete his final strides towards the bedroom, I throw myself to the other side of the room and try to brace the door as best I can. Slamming my shoulder against the door at the same time he tries to force it open. I quickly sink down to the floor once more, my legs and back aching, my head throbbing, my thoughts fogged in the inky black grip of a burgeoning concussion. I just need to hold out. For as long as I can, for the next few. Roger throws his full weight against the door once more. The force hammers through the wood, shaking my entire body. I can feel myself growing weaker, and the darkly violent obscenities that reach me from the hallway serve as a harrowing preview of what awaits when I can't hold the line any longer. As he momentarily relents, I can hear a light clattering behind me, before a high-pitched, dentist trill of a scream screeches through the door. Seconds later the source of the noise is revealed as a sharp gash appears around the top hinge of the door. The razor-thin edge of a disc cutter spits sawdust into the room as Roger tears his home apart to reach me. I press my chin down against my chest, trying to get my head away from the door, in case he decides to redirect the saw towards me. As I do so, I'm all too aware that he could still run that shredding, serrated blade down my back whenever he chooses. I just need to hold out. For someone. For anyone. My eyes fixed on the ground, tears forming in my eyes as the screaming continues behind me. I hear the first hinge fall to the ground, thudding softly against the carpet. After a brief silence, the shredding begins again, and a cloud of sawdust is spat out around the second hinge. For the second time in 2 days, I get the overwhelming feeling that I've entered the final few moments of my life. "This is the police. Open up." A young man's voice echoes from downstairs, almost lost amid the sharp scream of the saw. The buzzing stops. I attempt to catch my frantic breath as Roger falters. In the silence that follows, I can tell he wasn't expecting this. I can almost feel him calculating his next move, weighing up whether he can afford to keep going, whether he should silence me before answering the door, whether he can afford to take that risk. "If you make a noise, I'll make you wish you were dead," he whispers. He moves away from me, and quickly descends the stairway to answer the door. I choke back the gut-wrenching panic that's overtaken every fiber of my being, and try to focus on the next few steps ahead of me. I hear the front door unlock and casually swing open. I can't wait for Roger to come back, but even now, I don't know if I can surrender myself to the authorities. If the cop asks to look in the garage, where I told him I was hiding, I can maybe use the distraction to sneak down the stairs and out the front door. I hear Roger making small talk with the cop, some muffled words, telling him nothing's going on, discussing the precincts he'd worked in before retirement. I knew he'd be playing the ex-cop card. I can only hope it doesn't hold water. Sneaking over to the safe, I pull the door open to see a red and a blue journal lying in front of me. My heart in my throat, I pick both of them up, throw them into my bag and make my way to the top of the stairs. "Well, like I said, I know you have to look into this stuff, but I don't think you've got the right place," Roger says, effortlessly amiable when he needs to be. "I'll let you know if I see anything suspicious." "I appreciate that, thank you," the cop replies. I can hear the door start to close. "Oh, would you be able to open up your garage real quick?" I approach the top of the stairs, trying to keep myself out of sight. The silence in the hallway below me is palpable. "Sure," Roger says, his voice a calm, deep lake. I hear them move towards the inside garage door, as I creep slowly down the stairs. The pair make small talk as I inch closer and closer to the open entranceway. I place a silent foot on the lower landing, as the officer switches on the garage light. "What the F? This is Marshall I need." 2 gunshots cut through the quiet night air. I sprint silently out into the front yard, afraid to see where either shot landed, praying that both slammed through Roger's cold, dark heart. Even so, as a few shallow tears stream diagonally across my cheeks, I'm all too aware that I may have condemned an innocent man to die. I sprint across the street and keep going until I'm at least 5 blocks away. By the time I allow myself to pull to a stop, 3 more cop cars have already streaked past me heading in the direction of Roger's house. It's a long, paranoid walk to the next neighborhood over, where I take the late bus to the outskirts of Rockford. After walking into town, I visit the bowling alley nearby my father's house, and make my way to the quiet back street on the other side of the building. I spend the next 6 hours sitting in the cold, my back against the brick wall, waiting for the morning to arrive. Once it does, I make my way over to my dad's house, arriving just after he leaves to start his shift for the shop. I look around to see if the place is being watched. Seeing no one, I come in from a side street, using the spare key on my chain to let myself in. It's strange to be in my dad's house again. Even though I was here 3 days ago, even though there are still leftovers in the fridge from the last time I visited, it feels like it's been a lifetime. But after the last few days, the familiar smell of the place, and the comfortable silence within these 4 walls, is all I could ask for. I suddenly realize how exhausted I am. I walk upstairs, making my way into the comfort of my old room. I sit on my old single bed, far away from any of the windows, and start to type up the events that transpired the night before. Something about putting it all down is calming to me, as if I'm putting it all on the page just so I can turn it over. After that I examine the other 2 journals. One is Walter's, which contains only one notable entry concerning Mr. Souza, the same entry I transcribed from the old computer yesterday. Roger's journal is entirely new, and seems to be the latest of the 3. I've typed up the most important entry for you guys. In the early evening, almost the same moment as I type the final line on the journal entry, I hear Dad's landline ring. The noise scares me for some reason, as if the outside world were trying to encroach on my sanctuary. I sit back, calming myself down, letting it go to voicemail. Seconds after the call cuts out, the phone rings again. And again. And again. Something's wrong. I make my way downstairs, listening to the phone's ring go silent once more and, before the echoes of the previous call have even left the air, starting up once again. My hand hovers over the receiver. I don't want to answer, I know it isn't wise, but if this whole thing isn't over then I need to know. "Hello Mr. Ruscia, it's Detective Morrison. I'm sorry to bother you again but well there's been an incident concerning Michelle, do you have a moment?" My blood runs cold. The voice on the phone is calm, reasonable, almost pleasant, but it's also unmistakably familiar. "Mr. Ruscia?" Roger's voice carries over the phone, waiting for me to reply. I suddenly realize I'm breathing quickly, a sudden anxiety and fear carrying down the phone line. I don't say anything, but I expect my silence has said enough. "It's you, isn't it?" Roger's tone shifts into a recognizable pattern of predatory disdain as he realizes who he's talking to. "I knew you'd reach out to your dad eventually, but I never thought you'd be dumb enough to go home." "I have your journals, Roger." I try to speak calmly down the phone. "You make everything go back to normal and I'll—" "Oh no. No, it's too late for that." Roger cuts across me. "You've fucked it up for the both of us, Michelle. No, there's no going back now." I hear echoing footsteps as Roger changes location, followed by the heavy creak of an iron door, and then a brief rustling static as the phone is placed against someone's ear. It isn't Roger's voice this time. It's Walter's. "Please. Please." I didn't know whether he'd survived the ordeal in the woods, but it sounds like he's barely clinging on to life at the moment. I can hear the hours of brutal torment in his desperate, slurred speech. I can only imagine the horror, the sorrow that's coursing through him right now, once again at Roger's mercy, an expendable pawn in a psychopath's game. "You bring me the journals, tonight, and I'll let him go," Roger says. "If you aren't here by midnight I will kill him, if you contact the police I will kill him, and if you try to fucking trick me I will kill the both of you and everyone you hold dear. Do you understand?" I don't know what it is. Whether it's Walter, or Ralph, or the days of punishment I've had to endure at the hands of this man's obsession, but I know I can't run away from this any longer. "Where?" I ask. On the other end of the phone, I can almost sense Roger starting to smile. Journal entry, 1947. It all went wrong after Torrio left. It wasn't because Al couldn't lead, the boss was more than smart enough to head the outfit. It wasn't even the increasing violence that cut through the city like a carving knife in the years following Torrio's secession. In the end it was Mr. Sousa who brought down the great Al Capone. Though, maybe that ain't too fair. While it may be true that Sousa struck the final blow, it was already too late by then. Al was the architect of his own destruction, and I'm cursed to remember every second of it. At first it was just disconcertion. See, Al had built his business on a firm understanding of people. That simple mixture of greed and fear, the desire for self-preservation, vice and convenience. The boss played humanity like an instrument, all our faults and failings just different sections in his grand orchestra. But Sousa, and the organization he represented, played to an entirely different tune. Their motives were inscrutable, they couldn't be bought or threatened or blackmailed, and they had none of the traditions or honor that you'd find among the gangs. In Al's increasingly disturbed mind, their unknowable levels of influence and their complete distance from humanity made them entirely unpredictable. Next came the paranoia. Al started to see Sousa everywhere, sensing his invisible hand in every successful advance the outfit made. Eventually, even when things didn't go our way, he suspected Sousa's involvement, believing that he was playing both sides in some intricate, sinister game. The final stage was obsession. Al grew angry at the sight of Sousa's shadow lying over every aspect of his business. It made him erratic, violent, determined to be his own man. Over years of correspondence, whenever Sousa encouraged caution, Al would take bold action. When Sousa suggested someone be given responsibility, Al immediately lost all trust in them. A few members of the crew had met a brutal end simply because Sousa happened to mention them in passing. It all came to a head in 1929, starting with another meeting between Al and Sousa, which the latter, for his own protection, had made a point of holding out in the open. "They're moving on us." Al growls at the limey across from him. "They need to be taught a lesson." "Are you sure this is the time?" Mr. Sousa asks, like he has 100 times before. "I'm not gonna sit here and let Moran take another inch of my territory." Al slaps his hand against the table, causing the coffee cups to shudder. "You aren't in this game, Sousa. Don't act like you know anything about it." Sousa watches the ripples in his coffee smooth out. I can tell he's considering his words carefully. "While I don't share your particular expertise, Mr. Capone, I assure you, I know a great deal. Your erratic behavior has been noticed, by your enemies and the wider public certainly, but, more importantly, by the US government. You are becoming an unacceptable nuisance to them, and I have been forced to sacrifice my scientific impartiality more than once to keep them from your door." "Yeah, well, what if I don't need your help, huh? How about that?" "Honestly, that would be ideal, but your actions as of late have led us to believe otherwise. I have a lot riding on the success of our arrangement, Mr. Capone, and if we continue down this road, neither of us are going to get what we want." Al stares at Sousa, his face hardened in contempt. The subject of membership had been brought up a few times in the past. Al had a whole load of reasons why he wanted to join: influence, resources, the answers to his questions about the order, and increasingly, the chance to gain the upper hand on Sousa. Sousa's refusal to bring him into the fold has fueled a large part of his obsession with the man. "Sounds like I'm embarrassing you." Al speaks the words with a kind of scornful pride. He's happy about the idea of getting under Sousa's skin. Sousa hears the tone in his voice and, for the first time, I see something in his usually unwavering expression, a flicker of annoyance. Sousa stands up to leave, his eyes fixed on Al as he does so. "I have made assurances to the society that you have agreed to lie low. I would appreciate your compliance." He nods to Al and me before making his way down the street. Al watches him as he rounds the corner. With a single word, or even just a wave of his hand, Al could send someone after Sousa, and the man's life would have ended there. He's certainly angry enough to give the order. I'd never seen this rage in Al without somebody getting hurt. In the end, Al said one word, perhaps the only word he truly heard as Sousa was speaking. Although Sousa said it in his usual bored tone, Al spat it out with scorn. "Compliance." In that moment, I knew the end was near. In the next few days, Al did what Sousa recommended. He laid low, making his rounds across the city and conducting his business like we used to under Torrio. Every so often across the week, he'd have a meeting with a few of his enforcers, whispering a couple sentences to them here and there. Despite the calm way he was approaching his work, I knew it was only temporary. There was no way he was going to simply follow Sousa's orders. He was his own man. He was Al Capone. And Al Capone would do what Al Capone would do. Eventually the day rolled around, February 14, 1929. Ever since the meeting with Sousa, Al had been slowly concocting his plan for revenge. A strike against the North Side Gang in Moran, that showcased the very essence of Al Capone to the world: efficient, devious and brutal. He sent some of our enforcers to a North Sider property, dressed up in police uniforms. Thinking it was a raid, the North Side Gang followed their orders, listened to the cops as they were told to line up against the wall. Their compliance killed them. That was the stinger. It was almost as if the hit was some kind of poem, written in blood on a garage wall, penned by Al for Mr. Sousa. This is what compliance looks like. The two met only a few days later. As it turns out, it would be the final time they spoke. "Your precious public is out for blood." Sousa passes a copy of the Daily News to Al. The headline reads "Massacre 7 of Moran Gang." A picture of the crime scene hangs below it and, below that, a picture of Al. The local government is answering the call. Al puts the paper to the side without reading it. "This ain't gonna last." "Things rarely do." Sousa muses. A moment passes between the two. As much as Al wants to brush this aside, both men know the damage that's been done, to the city, to Al's reputation and to their contract. "The incident has helped me reach my conclusion." Sousa continues. "While the criminal mind is unique, and capable of exceptional feats, it is too prone to impulsive, selfish and violent behavior. I was wrong to believe it held a place amongst our ranks. I am afraid your application has been rescinded." Al knew this was coming. I know he's wondering whether he can afford to let Sousa leave this place. In the end, his response comes as a warning. "If you even think of taking a shot at us, Sousa, I can assure you, we have no interest in doing so. In fact, we will be withdrawing all influence from your operations immediately." Sousa puts on his hat, and gives me one last look as he makes his way to the door. Then, he turns, and looks to Al. "Good luck, Mr. Capone." What does he mean by that? Al looks over to me as soon as Sousa has departed. "What do you think he means, kid?" I could tell Al was disturbed by Sousa's parting words, by the unknown implication they held. It turns out, we would come to learn what he meant almost immediately. In the wake of the hit on the North Side Gang, Al received a summons from the Chicago grand jury, who had suddenly made a great deal of headway with their investigation of his business. Not long after, rumors came from Washington that a team of government accountants were combing through his personal finances. As political pressure on the boss increased, I finally understood the true extent of the political protection Mr. Sousa had afforded Al. In its absence, investigations started to come out of the woodwork, exploiting every inconsistency in the boss's books, looking for any opportunity to bring him to account. On March 27, a month and a half after Sousa severed their contract, Al was arrested outside the Chicago courthouse. It didn't stick at first, but the arrest achieved what the government wanted. It demonstrated that even the great Al Capone was beholden to the law. Merely 3 years later, the great Al Capone, the greatest criminal mind the world had ever known, was stitching shoes in Atlanta, U.S. penitentiary. How I avoided the same fate, I'll never know. But I quickly realized there was nothing left for me in Chicago. With the blessing of Rika, I left the city that same year. Today is February 16, 1947, exactly 18 years since I last saw Mr. Souza. The best thing about having a good memory is you can start writing your journal at any time in your life. I've been writing this journal, and those before it, since the end of January, feverishly putting down every detail of my time with Al. The boss died 3 weeks ago. Unlike so many I'd seen in our business, Colosimo, Frank, O'Banion to name a few, Al spent his final moments in his home, lying in his own bed, surrounded by family. He hardly recognized me when I visited. In fact, I debated not visiting at all. I'd seen a load of stuff over the years that I wish I could forget, and the image of Al, wasting away on his deathbed, wasn't something I wanted to carry with me for the rest of my life. Standing in that room, as the man I once knew passed in and out of consciousness, I was surprised when he called me over. I felt my eyes well up as I stepped towards him, as he muttered something in a tone too weak for me to hear. "Sorry, boss?" I asked, holding back tears as I leaned closer. Al whispered one word to me, before drifting out of his own mind once again. "Souza." I left that night. I didn't sleep a wink on the 5-hour red-eye from Florida, thinking about Al's final half-lucid words to me. It was spoken like a warning, a vague confession that only I would understand. By the time the plane's wheels hit tarmac again, I think I understood too well. Al's health had begun to deteriorate as soon as he went to prison. One of the symptoms, that stayed with him even as the pneumonia took his life, was early-onset dementia. As much as he'd grown to hate Souza, Al had always respected the principle of omerta, vowing never to divulge anything about the strange organization that used to operate in the tunnels beneath Chicago. However, as his sanity fell away, as that disciplined silence started to erode, there was no telling what he might have let slip. I wondered about Souza, whether he could afford the secrets Al knew getting out into the world. And I wondered about those final ailments, seemingly natural but occurring in such quick succession, the debilitating stroke, the sudden pneumonia and the cardiac arrest that ultimately took Al's life, all happening within 4 days of one another. Perhaps someday, years from now, Souza would grow to mistrust me. He knows what I have in my head, that I remember every word he's ever spoken to me, the face of everyone who entered those tunnels. If he really killed Al to protect that knowledge, if he's willing to do the same to me, then I can't afford for the things I've seen to be lost to history. And, after 27 years, that brings us to today. If you are reading this entry, and the journals that preceded it, then you now possess a full knowledge of my time in the Chicago outfit, day by day, week by week, exactly as I witnessed them. I will never need this diary. For as long as I live I'll never have a reason to read it, but I hope that, someday, others might get the chance. At the height of Al's power, no one would have dared challenge him. Now people are coming out of the woodwork with stories, gossip and entertaining lies. That's something I've come to learn, that the secrets buried at an empire's height are more likely to be uncovered in its ruins. I can't come forward against Souza now, but maybe I don't have to. Maybe I just have to hide what I know, protect the secrets I hold, and give Souza's empire the chance to fall. I'm going to put these journals somewhere they may never be found, somewhere they will rest for as long as fate allows. I may not live to see them be uncovered, but as long as they remain in their hiding place, the truth will be alive. It's the least I can do, for humanity, for truth, and ultimately for my friend, Al. I leave my father's house only a few moments before he arrives home. I swear I can hear his key turning in the front door lock as I make my way out the back. It feels wrong to exclude him from everything that's going on, and right now I want nothing more than to turn around, hug him close and cry the last few days away. But I know I can't turn back, and I certainly can't let myself see him. There's a final chapter to this story, a last act that needs to play out before I close the book on it forever. I feel like, if I see my father, even for a moment, I'll never be able to do what needs to be done. I tell myself that I'll see him when I get home, once Walter and I are safe, and Roger has been dealt with once and for all. But as I take a final look at the house I grew up in, I'm well aware that I may never come back here. That I might never see my dad again. As the evening sets in around me, I swallow back a quiet wave of tears, turn my back on the house and catch the night bus to Chicago. It's dark by the time I arrive in the city. I walk a solemn path through the crowded streets. Groups of friends pass me by, laughing coworkers drop in and out of the nearby bars. The whole city is alive around me, completely unaware of the dark story that's unfolding at the same time. Walking among a city of people, whilst being utterly separate from all of them, I already feel like a ghost. And who knows, by the end of tonight, perhaps I will be. It's easy to follow the route that Roger gave me. I pass by Ronan Park, crossing over the Chicago River. After that I pass a cemetery, which isn't at all foreboding, before finally arriving at the small bar Roger described, a classy-looking place, its facade of green and white lights shining against the street. After a few minutes of testing fences and pacing through side streets, I find myself roughly behind the bar itself. The alleyway is empty, save for a metal fire escape and an unassuming dark iron door set into a red brick wall. An old metal chain with a broken lock lies on the ground beside it. This door had been described in painstaking detail by Roger, ensuring that I wouldn't pass it by. It would be left unlocked for me. I was to walk through it alone, carrying the journals with me and nothing else. If I tried to trick him, if I left any of the documents behind, or if I attempted to call the authorities, then Walter would pay the price. I reach out and pull the heavy door back. The hinges groan in protest, as if warning me not to continue. Beyond the rusted frame, a rough-cut set of stone steps descend into darkness. Roger wanted somewhere out of the way, somewhere quiet, somewhere we could conduct the transaction with no interference. His decision was a practical one, however, it's not lost on me how fitting it is that our final meeting would take place here. This story has been playing out for 98 years. It's traveled a long way, and enveloped the lives of so many people. Nevertheless, after almost a century, it will end the same way it started, with 2 wanted criminals in the tunnels of Chicago. My steps echoing on cold stone, I make my way down into the darkness, holding my phone's flashlight in one hand, and a cloth bag from my old bedroom at my side. The bag's contents, 3 leather-bound documents, brush against my leg with each footfall. They seem to grow heavier the closer I get to my destination. I drop through a small tunnel, taking a right at a narrow T-junction and shifting awkwardly through a corridor full of old timber planks, the corridor beyond it full of small tunnels and alcoves. I suddenly find my pace slowing to a crawl. In a few moments, I'll reach a stone doorway, a chalk X above the frame marking the spot where the exchange will take place. I know I shouldn't keep Roger waiting. I can imagine him growing more agitated as we draw closer and closer to midnight, and I'd hate for Walter to suffer any longer than he has to. Even so, as dreadful, sobering, and grimly funereal as this walk has been, I'm still savoring every intermediary moment, embracing the precious minutes before I have to face Roger. Before I walk into a room that I may never leave. Upon seeing the doorway, I turn off my flashlight and pull a metal cigarette lighter out of my pocket. I ignite it and slide a switch to one side, locking a healthy plume of flame in place. With the flame still flickering, I remove my thumb from the lever, holding the dim light source in front of me. Then, I carefully close my fist over both the lighter and the straps of my cloth satchel. I hold my arm up to face level, the bag swinging below my hand, bathed in the warm orange light above it. Taking one last breath of peaceful air, I step over the threshold. "You took your time." A vindictive snarl echoes off the walls of the chamber. I don't reply. I don't think he needs me to. The sight is worse than I imagined. Roger is standing at the other end of the moderately sized chamber, cement and broken tile, half shrouded in shadow. The harsh glow of his flashlight illuminates his own hulking frame, the cruel look on his face, and the outline of a handgun at his side. On the floor beside him, I see the kneeling figure of Walter, his skin a patchwork of bruises and fresh blood, his body bound, not by rope or wire, but by pain, submission and defeat. As heartbreaking as it is to see what's become of him, it's his silence that crushes me even further. Even through the obvious pain, he's perfectly quiet, his head bowed. His cries have gone unanswered, his pleas for mercy ignored. Any sound he could make has been rendered pointless in the face of Roger's overpowering apathy, so he's stopped making any at all. He doesn't even acknowledge my arrival, staring penitently at the floor, trying to wish himself away from this wretched place. Roger looks at the bag held in front of me, something close to a smirk flickers in the darkness. "It's good to see you, Michelle. This poor son of a bitch was worried about being 0 for 2. He pointedly jabs the muzzle of the gun against Walter's head, while keeping his eyes fixed on me. "You got them?" Without saying anything, I let one of the cloth straps fall from my closed fist. The bag hangs open, turning slowly back and forth on its axis, displaying the 3 books in a covering of saran wrap. Roger's eyes light up as he sees them, the object of his obsession for over 30 years suddenly laid before him, the goal that determined his career, his life, that turned him into a bitter old man in an empty home. "Hand them over," he says, practically salivating beneath his commanding tone. "Walter first." Roger's sudden laugh is devoid of all humor. "Oh, that's not how this works." I see the gun start to raise towards me, causing me to stretch out my free hand on reflex. It's a stupid gesture. I know there's nothing I can do to defend myself once that barrel reaches me. "You don't want to do that." Roger falters briefly, his eyes narrowing, the gun holding in midair. He may have been expecting some panicked protest, a cry or a look of fear, but the hasty facade of confidence I've managed to foist into my words has caught him off guard. His shadowed features contort into a scowl. Without needing a prompt, I explain myself. "See, not long after arriving in Chicago, less than an hour before midnight, I'd dropped into a rundown tattoo parlor that I knew from experience also sold a bunch of drug paraphernalia over the counter. Once I got there, I spent the last of my remaining dollars on a set of expensive Zippo lighters and a few bottles of lighter fluid. Shortly after my descent into the tunnels, I doused my satchel with the pungent liquid, leaving only the straps dry. At the moment, there was just enough distance between the open flame gripped in my fist and the butane-soaked cloth hanging from the same hand. His journals should be safe, so long as I'm still holding both. Roger may not have much of a conscience, but there is one thing he cares about. A delicious glimmer of concern flashes across the man's face, followed by a ripple of anger. "You know if you drop that I will kill you," he says once I've finished talking, his voice a low growl. "You have three options, Roger. If you kill me, your journals go up in flames." As I talk, the insanity of what I'm discussing reverberates through my mind. I feel sudden flash of fear which quickly gives way to angered resolve. If you kill Walter, we both know that I'll be next, and I'll need the distraction to get away. The only way these fucking books stay readable is if we do this properly. I stare through the darkness into Roger's eyes. As he meets my stare, I see two dark wells of sheer disgust. "They won't burn that fast." He growls once more, this time with a noticeable waver in his voice. I could put him out. "It's been 32 years, Roger," I say, refusing to lower my gaze. "Is that a chance you want to take?" "It's called zugzwang. I apologize if that breaks the tension for you guys. But that's the term Ralph used to use when he taught me the concept. I guess you could call it forcing a move. In principle, playing a move that determines your opponent's next action is almost always desirable. Ralph used to pull it on me all the time, and whenever I managed to pull it against him his eyes would light up, pleased to see that I was learning. My old friend taught me a lot over the years, and as I examine Roger's dark, reticent expression, I can tell it was a lesson worth learning. Roger slowly swaps the gun from one hand to another. He reaches his free hand down to his hostage and hoists him up onto shaky feet. Walter is hunched over, barely able to stand as Roger pushes him toward me. He slowly passes by me. I hear the faintest whisper. "I'm sorry." I keep my eyes forward as Walter's soft footsteps carry him back into the tunnel and quickly fade away. He was never cut out for this. Roger flickers his eyes to the doorway and back to me. "Were any of you?" "I was." Roger states the words with conviction. "I had a plan. I stuck to it. I didn't get sidetracked by the score of a lifetime chasing fucking fairy tales. Sousa and his Illuminati bullsh." He quickly pulled himself out of the train of thought. "That doesn't matter anymore. Give me my journals." "You know I can't, not yet," I reply, trying to keep myself calm. The implication is clear between us both. Walter is practically hobbled at the moment, and once Roger gets the journals there's nothing to stop him going after us. Walter needs a chance to make his way out the tunnels before I let go of my only bargaining chip. No, you've had it your way long fucking enough." Roger glowers. "You break into my home? You try to ruin my fucking life? Give me what's mine. Now." His demand echoes across the room. A thin plume of fire burns between us as I watch Roger's face, the restlessness, the agitation, the momentary glances towards the corridor. He's thinking about catching up with Walter. He was never going to let us escape. "Okay," I say, bracing myself for what's to come. Without looking away from the man, I throw the cloth satchel between us and to the side. "I hope it's worth it." For the briefest moment Roger looks away from me and over to the journals. I throw the lighter and run. The world erupts around me. Like a blanket of soft thunder, I hear a roll of crackling flame burst into life behind me. After the shockwave of heat sweeps over me, a roar of panic and unbound rage is quickly followed up by an echoing gunshot. The bullet plunges into the wall beside me, showering a cascade of fractured tile into my face. I don't stop for a second. sprinting down the corridor, unpursued for the moment as Roger tries to salvage his precious journals. Moments later, a second, far louder rumble of flame bursts out behind me, and Roger's angered bellows turn to screams. I use the 2 water bottles, that I'd collected from the hotel on Lake Michigan, to store the remainder of the lighter fluid. Both of them were full to the brim, and hidden away at the bottom of the bag, beneath the journals, serving as a secondary fuel. Judging by the agonized noises emanating from the room, they did their job. I just hope they've done enough. The screams die out with the flames, descending into a grated, pained breathing that carries down the corridor. Moments later I hear Roger stumble out into the tunnel behind me, grunting through gritted teeth as he breaks out into a run. I turn the corner just in time, as another shot echoes through the tunnels. Facing the corridor of loose timber, I feel a surge of panic before forcing myself into the tight space. I had a head start, and if I can just get through here, maybe I can make it out, but Roger's sure to catch up with me before I am even halfway through. What was previously a careful process becomes one of strength and desperation as I power through the blocked corridor. Roger's footsteps grow louder and louder until, my heart sinking, I see him turn the corner behind me. In that moment, trapped in place, I allow myself to look back at my pursuer. Roger's face has been discolored and torn by the flames, deep burn marks running across his hands and neck, bright red and yellow with a strange translucent sheen, streams of blood flowing from the places where the skin has been broken. His every gasp is filled with pain and violent hatred, as he fixes his eyes on me and raises the gun. With nowhere to go, I stare into his vengeful eyes and wait for the shot to come. Suddenly Roger lurches to the side, thrown against the wall some shadowed force. Screams of anguish and catharsis rise to meet Roger's violent howls, as Walter forces the larger man against the wall, a pale white shard of floor tiling splattering red as Walter slams it into Roger's arm and shoulder. Walter should have been through here by now. He should be in the last few quarters before the door to Chicago. Maybe he knew Roger would come for us, maybe he just had a score to settle, a desire to finally break his own cycle of victimhood and retreat. Amid every lung-draining scream that Walter aims at Roger, I can hear one word meant for me. Go. I can see the empty corridor ahead of me, leading back to the open air and the relative safety of Chicago. Behind me is chaos, blood and noise, as Walter kicks and screams against a far more powerful foe, feeling the scales tip slowly against him. If I'm going to get away, I'm going to have to go now. Without any hesitation, I turn back to Walter. Forcing myself back the way I came, with only a few obstructions between myself and the furious battle that's playing out before me. Roger throws Walter against the wall as I reach him, and hammers him repeatedly with a brutal right hook. You ruined fucking everything, he shrieks with each thudding punch. I see a flood of fresh blood erupt from Walter's nose as the impacts continue. With almost nothing left, I launch myself at Roger, trying to bring him down in any way I can. Hardly acknowledging my attack, he reaches an arm out and grabs me by the neck, his iron grip closing over my windpipe as he turns from the defeated Walter, and brings all his attention to me. As his arm begins to raise up slightly, I feel myself lifted onto the tips of my feet, brushing them frantically against the ground as he chokes the life out of me. They're gone. He yells, his distraught voice breaking. His grip tightens as he says it, and doesn't relent. Do you have any idea? Any idea what I'm going to do to you? With the last of my fading strength, as my vision starts to dampen to a sharp point, I muster up everything I have left. All the anger, all the betrayal, all the fear I'd felt in the last few days. I channel it all into one final act. My therapist wouldn't like any of this. With 2 knuckles from my left hand, I strike out at Roger's larynx, momentarily collapsing the soft tissue of his neck backwards. As he falters, maintaining his choking grip, I bring my right hand out from behind my back, pulling the stun gun, with one last cartridge, from its place in my waistline. In one motion, I hold the gun sideways, jam it forcefully against the bridge of Roger's nose and pull the trigger. The halls ring with the sound of Roger's gut-wrenching agony. I feel myself hit the floor, my weak legs giving way below me. Roger drops to the ground beside me, writhing and convulsing, his eyes bleeding and destroyed, his mind alight, surging with over 1,000,000 volts of electricity. Then, suddenly, silence. I pull myself weakly up against the wall and stare out at the scene before me. Roger is hunched against the floor, moaning softly, no longer able to speak or move. Walter is pulling himself to his feet. "Let me," he whispers, half-winded, half-dazed. "It should be me." He moves towards Roger, the shard of tile in his hands. I look away from the wall, as I hear something splatter against the ground, a frenzied, uneven gasping and, finally, the sound of Roger's body slumping to the floor. It's the last thing I hear before I lose consciousness. When I wake up, I can't see anything. I'm upright, sitting in a chair. My hands bound behind my back and a dark cloth bag placed over my head. I don't know where I am. Walter? Walter? He's safe. A soft, unfamiliar voice says somewhere ahead of me. What's happening? Where? You're still in the tunnels, I'm afraid, but we'll be done shortly. Who are you? You know who we are. My body tightens up. I'd thought my night was over, that Roger was the only threat in these tunnels. I suddenly understand how Capone felt when he took over from Torrio, exchanging the devil you know for the one you don't. Still, the similarity gives me some idea of who I'm talking to. So it's true. All of it? Unfortunately so. I test out the cords that are holding my wrists together. They aren't painful, but they refuse to give way. How long have you been following me? There's a moment of pause. We've had an eye on you for the past few days, but we investigated shortly after you posted your first installment. The statement seems so nonchalant, yet it throws me back through the interactions I'd had throughout this ordeal. The shadows I saw in the forest, the noises in the hotel, the feeling of being watched when I took the bus back to Chicago. On the run from the law, from Roger, I'd readily acknowledged those passing moments as simple paranoia. Maybe I wasn't so paranoid after all. Wait. You browse fucking Nosleep? We are vigilant of any narrative that may involve us. It doesn't matter where we find it. A silence passes between the both of us. I still have no idea what they want from me, but from the journal entries I've read, I'm lucky they haven't killed me already. That said, if they knew I was posting those stories, that raises an interesting question. Why didn't you take them down? The benefits outweigh the costs. Of those who read your posts, the smart ones will think you're lying. The smarter ones, perhaps, will be able to find us. And you want that? Traditionally no. But times are rapidly changing. We value resourcefulness and we're willing to reward it. I hear the figure step towards me, crossing round the back of my chair. A light tug signals the slow removal of my bindings. My organization's partial role in your recent misfortune has been embarrassing, and I for one am impressed by how you've handled it. As of a few minutes ago, you are no longer a suspect in the murder of Maria and Martin Towers. In fact, your criminal record has been expunged. The bindings fall to the floor. I reach my hands up to the black cloth covering my head, but feel a delicate hand land on mine, gently encouraging me to let my hands fall back to my side. What you do from here on out is your business, of course. But we wanted to extend the offer. We are here, if you can find us. Any chance I could get a clue? The figure laughs. We were planning to. Upon closer inspection, it turns out someone has already provided one. I hear the footsteps pace away from me, before stopping suddenly. One last thing, we looked through the remnants of those burnt journals. From the parts I could examine, it looked like someone switched out the contents for a set of old, school textbooks. Would you happen to know anything about that? I choose to remain silent. They shouldn't get to be the only ones with secrets. I thought not. Without another word, the figure departs. I take the veil off my head, massaging my slightly numb wrists, and look around. Pulling out my phone, I turn on my flashlight and illuminate the space around me. I've never seen this room before, but it feels familiar. I think I read about it. The space is a large, cavernous rectangular room with a high ceiling. Spanning the long sides of the room, a set of cascading wooden seats, like old bleachers, rise from the floor, about 5 or 6 levels high. Shining my flashlight above me, I watch the rays of light as they dance and refract through an ornate, dust-covered chandelier. The moment I turn around, my suspicions are confirmed. A large wooden altar, a raised stage with an antique podium set at the center, stands at the other end of the room, placed perfectly to address those sitting in the bleachers. This is Sousa's chamber. Standing up from my chair, I look briefly around before making my way over to the altar, and lifting my aching body up onto the stage. Everything is covered in a thick layer of dust. It clearly hasn't been used in countless decades. And yet, I discover a few pages of handwritten paper and a small slip of card in the middle of the podium, as if a speech is about to be given. They're free of dust themselves, but when I lift them up they reveal a rectangle of completely clean wood, as if they had been here for a long time, recently picked up and then placed back in their original position. I have a feeling this is what they wanted me to find. It's hard to read in the harsh contrast of the flashlight's beam and the pitch darkness, and once I get a look at the first few sentences, I realize that this isn't the place. It's around 2 a.m. by the time I make my way out of the tunnels. I make my way back onto the streets, and stop by at the bar I passed on my way to meet Roger. I hardly hear anything they say as they hurriedly sit me down at a booth and bring me a drink. What had started as an ordinary tragedy, and a strange, seemingly singular occurrence, had turned into the hardest ordeals of my life. My body is bruised, aching and tired. After I'm done here, I'll be returning to my father's house and staying there for a good long while. Maybe I will someday take that strange figure up on their invitation. Maybe the curiosity I feel about Sousa's organization will get the better of me, and I'll follow whatever clues they gave me. I don't know yet. But if you're willing, after everything you've heard, to try and find them, don't let me stop you. I've put the contents of the documents below for you to read. Good luck. Journal entry, 1986. It's been a long time since I last wrote one of these. 39 years have gone by since I penned the last entry in my journal. My head's now rich with memories, passing careers, fleeting vacations, adventure and drudgery in equal measure, loves won and ultimately lost. Every moment of it floods through my consciousness, almost unbearably at times, as if my mind were bursting at the seams with the sheer pressure of all I've seen. But as I stare at the scene in front of me, my mind quiets down a little, the sounds and pictures fading to the back as I fix my eyes on my TV set. I'd scarcely believed it when I saw the commercials. They'd been running throughout the week, shouting for all the world to hear. Not only had the tunnels beneath the Lexington Hotel been uncovered, but the contents were going to be uncovered on live TV. There was no better way for the journals to be discovered, no better way for their contents to be broadcast to the world than through the medium of national live television. The secrets of Sousa and his group, and their actions towards the boss, were going to be revealed to everyone in North America at once. For the first time in years, I felt a pit of childlike excitement in my stomach as I watched them drill through the concrete walls, inching closer and closer to where I'd hidden my testimony. I watched as the cameras panned down the corridor leading up to it. And then, nothing. As the credits begin to roll, I turn my TV off. It had always been a gamble. I'd accepted long ago that the journals may not be uncovered in my lifetime, that the strange organization Sousa worked for could easily have circumvented their discovery, but I always hoped I'd manage to outsmart them, just this once. To see an entire excavation team enter those tunnels, to watch them conduct a search on live television, only for them to claim to have found nothing? I feel my excitement slowly peel away, leaving me in empty, disheartened silence. An unfamiliar sound breaks the quiet. My doorbell rings once, echoing in the quiet evening air. Pulling myself to my feet, I walk down the hallway, place the chain on the door, and slowly swing it open. I hope I've not come at a bad time. The figure at the door regards me with a warm smile. The sparkling eyes are set in a nest of wrinkles, wisps of winter white hair have been combed expertly into a neat cloud. Mr. Sousa must be upwards of 90 years old by now, but he stands as tall as he did back then, carrying himself with a confidence that remains undiminished by time, and though his demeanor seems to have softened, his eyes hold that very same sharpness. "What are you doing here?" "I won't be staying long," he says decidedly. "Just making the rounds. May I come in?" There's an emotion in his voice that's hard to place, or perhaps it's just hard to imagine him feeling any. Below the steady tide of his words, lies an undercurrent of sadness. Of course. I open the door for the man, who shuffles through into the lounge. I step through after him and gesture to the drinks cabinet on the far wall. He nods in appreciation and I pull out a bottle of whiskey, and 2 glasses. It warms us both a little. It tasted better back then. Maybe because we weren't allowed to have it. Sousa smiles, and gestures to the TV set. "Did you catch the show tonight?" he asks. I nod. Sousa looks down at his drink. "There are very few of us left who really knew the man. Perhaps no one knew him as well as you and I did." There's a melancholy in his voice. I'm starting to think this night means as much to him as it does to me. "They never truly looked at me the same way," he sighs. "My reputation within the society rose in parallel to his own, and it fell with him also. Strange how much our lives were tied to the fate of that man." "What are you?" I ask, after so many years, no longer fearing the answer. "A greater good. Or perhaps a lesser evil." He stares into his drink. "You call that an answer?" "I call it moral relativism." "Relative to what?" Sousa smiles. The only thing worse than an organization that guides human progress, an organization that stifles it. Suddenly, I see Sousa in a new light. All this time I thought his organization was the tip of some clandestine pyramid, unsurpassable and unknowable. But if his implication is correct, there was another force out there. They were fighting for ideology, territory and existence. They were playing the same game we were. "So you're just another outfit?" I say, almost joking. "Maybe we are," he replies, hardly fazed either way. Our conversation lasts a little longer. He drops no hints as to who he really is, or what he was doing all those years. In fact, he mostly asks me about me, and about how my life had been since then. He seems happy that I got to live a normal life. I suppose it's something he never got to have. When we finish our drinks, I walk him back out and he steps across the threshold onto my doorstep. Before turning away, he pulls something out of his jacket. "I don't suppose we'll meet again, but if you ever want to." He hands a folded note over to me, and I open it up to find another set of boxes, this time full of symbols and circles. I guess this is what passes for a calling card where he's from. I put it in my pocket, as Sousa starts to make his way down the path. "Mr. Sousa." He turns around expectantly. "I was just wondering, I don't mean anything by it. Was I ever considered? For membership, I mean." Sousa seems to genuinely smile. "I considered it, yes, your mind is extraordinary. But I'm afraid you weren't the type." He thinks for a moment. Mr. Capone had a desire to change the world. They'll never admit it, but that's what the society are looking for. That ambition, that vision. It's the guiding characteristic of our world's greatest heroes. And, perhaps, its worst monsters. "Which one are you?" I ask. Sousa smiles. "I imagine I'll be remembered as both." He chuckles sadly to himself. "Goodbye, Mr. Sousa. Have a pleasant evening, Nicholas." And with that Mr. Sousa disappears once again. I stand by the door for a while, quietly taking in what he's told me, turning the paper over in my hands. Up until now I never really thought of Sousa as a man. He was a force, an entity, a trickster with a human face, but none of our deeper qualities. Those feelings had changed in an instant. Sure, he was secretive, unflappable, party to the greater secrets of our world, but even so, the old man who left my house was just that, an old man, carrying around his triumphs and regrets, the same way all of us must. After what he's told me, I still don't think I truly know the man, but I think I may understand him. However, I'm suddenly a lot more interested in what he didn't say. What passed without mention and, perhaps, without notice. An omission which suddenly brings new life into my old bones. He never mentioned the journals. I spend the next 15 minutes moving through the house, picking up everything I'm going to need for the next few days. Once I'm ready, I pull my jacket from the hook in the hallway and step out the front door. I catch the red-eye to Chicago that night. I check into an airport hotel and wait the next day out, resting up, watching the public voice their disappointment in the show on the local news. As soon as night rolls around, I make my way into the city, climbing out of my taxi beside the gates of the Lexington Hotel. If I had any time to spare, as I passed through the broken gate to the now dilapidated building, I'm sure I'd feel the same thing I felt when I saw Al for the last time, a sense of sadness to see such a powerful institution brought low by time. But as I walk through the dusty, desiccated bones of the old hotel, I have only one question on my mind. Are my journals still there? Making my way under a stream of warning tape, heading back into the tunnels beneath Chicago, I pull a flashlight from my pocket and make my way across the rubble-laden floor. The tunnels were hardly lit, but once I've been somewhere I can always find my way back. Passing between the idle generators, and other pieces of machinery that have yet to be removed from the site, I step over the large concrete slab and into the vault. Walking down the corridor, I'm greeted by the wooden panel, behind which I stashed the journals all those years ago. The journals are nowhere to be found. The latch has been forced open, the dust of handprints on the panel itself look almost fresh. It looks like a workman broke it open and took what was inside. By the disappointment on Geraldo Rivera's face when he gave his on-screen apology, whoever took my journals didn't tell anyone. For the first time in a very long while, I find myself laughing completely uncontrollably. Despite the danger of my intrusion, and the dust in the air that causes me to break into an intermittent cough, I can't help but fill the echoing hallways with noise. It's not because I'm surprised, it's quite the opposite. My teacher, my boss, my long-lost friend always saw people in the same way, greedy, sinful and flawed. The idea that my journals, that an object of such historic and global significance has ended up in the hands of some common thief. I can't think of anything more fitting. Eventually, I collect myself, and listen to the echoes fade against the tunnel walls. No one hears. No one's coming. I have all the time in the world. And I know just what to do with it. Over the next few hours, I take a long final walk through the tunnels. I'm cold, my legs ache and decades of dust begin to scratch at my throat. None of it seems to matter, however, as I move away from the Lexington, surfacing briefly into the quiet city streets before making my way below into the next set of tunnels. As I walk the dark halls I used to own, I realize I feel more at home here than I have for years. I suppose it's about time I addressed you personally. If you have just found this note, then you are standing in the old meeting chamber, utilized by a man called Mr. Souza, and the rest of his strange society. If you've managed to make your way here, then it's safe to assume you've read my journals. I'm now too old to chase ghosts, my senses no longer as sharp as they were in my past, when the stakes were high and every day could bring death alongside it. But I will use this final entry to tell you what I know, and leave you with a parting gift, to do with what you will. If you've come this far, if you've chosen to start on this path, then perhaps this will help you to find the answers at the end. I'm certain that, whatever you find, it will not disappoint.